Heyo, Highside, Lowside audience. It is Zack here, back with my friend Spurge for yet another season of RevZilla's podcast. This is season 8 of Highside, Lowside, episode 1. We will be looking at 2024 and all of the fun motorcycles coming our way. That is sport bikes, adventure bikes, cruisers, electric and alternative motorcycles, you name it. We are going to talk about it. We're going to do that with the Silver Fox himself, Mr. Lance Oliver. We're also going to cover Triumph's new motocross bike, as well as ATV and UTV legality on public roads. But before we get to all of that, Spurge has got a quick word from our sponsor, Motul.
Not only are we back for season 8, but Motul is back as our title sponsor. And we just want to say thank you. So if you're watching this episode as it releases, it's the perfect time to crank it up in the garage while you're getting your bike ready for riding season. And Motul has all of your lubrication needs covered. So whether you need to do an oil change, or you need to clean that chain and sprocket, you can check out RevZilla.com/Motul. That's MOTUL to get yourself set up. And if you have any questions on that winter maintenance that you might need to be doing, you can always check out some of the content that our friend Ari Henning is producing with a little show called The Shop Manual. Also, while you're over on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the RPM membership program to get all of the benefits that RevZilla has for you, our favorite riders out there. There's a lot of great additional savings you can find if you are part of the RPM team. And you also get a Rev Pro membership so you can plan out all of your rides that you might want to tackle in 2024. All that much, much more over on RevZilla.com. But for right now, let's kick off Season 8.
Okie dokie, everybody. The first topic of Season 8 will be not the news, as is tradition. And
you're just going to jump right in. You're not going to say, hey, how have you been for the last couple of months? We're going to acknowledge to the audience that we haven't been doing a podcast for like 3 months at this point in time. Come on.
How was your honeymoon? That kind of thing?
Let's have a little
Don't care.
Bit. You don't want to know? You don't want to know. I mean, it was lovely. Thank you for asking. Aruba in December is quite nice. I recommend it to anybody out there looking for a getaway from the Northeast.
This is
fine. We won't deter. We will just jump right in and tell us about not the news, Zach. Go ahead. I don't care how you're doing either. I don't want to know.
This is actually true. Spurgeon and I are friends. And this is also true that I have not asked him about his honeymoon yet. And we are now recording this podcast and he's been home for like a week and a half. So I think we're both right. We should be talking about motorcycles and not your honeymoon, but I do owe you a phone call. And for that, I am sorry.
Well, let's skip my honeymoon part, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that Zach and I have been away for a bit of an extended period of time from the podcast. We are coming back live here in 24. We're excited to be back. There's been a lot of goings on. We've been creating a lot of content, and unfortunately, we took a little bit of a longer hiatus than we initially planned for Highside, Lowside. But man, we are excited to be here in front of the microphones again.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And talking about a not the news topic, which, as promised in the intro, will be regarding a European motocross bike, specifically the Triumph. I believe it's the TF250X. Is that right? Spurgeon and Highside, Lowside listeners who listen to season 7 might actually be familiar with the sound of this bike.
It's true. It was one of our engine sounds from the guessing game. It's something that's been talked about for quite a while at this point. Triumph's been teasing this bike out for, I think, around 2 years, maybe a little bit longer than that.
Yeah.
So really, this is a bike that Triumph is bringing to market for competition use in 2024. It is going to be a motocross aimed model. As the name implies, it's going to be for the 250 class. And it's really got a lot of top of the line componentry and features kind of aimed at the pinnacle of what you can expect in a motocross bike in 2024. So I think it's time we get producer Chase to start the timer. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, we have a time limit for this because Zach and I tend to ramble. We've probably already talked for 3 minutes about not the news. And frankly, we're just getting into not the news. So that's why we have our producer Chase starting a timer right now.
So here's the deal with this bike. The 250 motocross segment is long-running, long-standing. And the recipe for building a 250 motocross bike is pretty clear, right? It is a 250cc four-stroke single. You got, obviously, the wheel sizes are standard. The frame builds are usually pretty standard. The engine approximate engine size and foundational elements are pretty much standard. So it's very clear what you need to do to compete in the 250 motocross class. However, because it's been around for so long, and because all the other companies that have been working for so long have done so much refining of this recipe, I feel like it's both simple and difficult to compete in this category. So my question to you, Spurge, is do you think Triumph can do it? And what do you think sets this bike apart from other bikes?
Yeah, so I did a lot of research on this, and actually the 250 class, in general, has seen, quite a lot of innovation with traction control and launch controls. And, it was interesting because I was trying to do some research into like where it falls between like the Japanese manufacturers and some of the European manufacturers that exist, like KTM. From a pricing standpoint, it is around $10,000, which is around $1,000 more than the majority of the Japanese competition. And it falls just shy of the KTM model price, which is around like 10.2. So it's definitely pricing itself at the top tier of the market, but it's coming out of the gate with a lot of that technical innovation with, from what I've read, different levels of traction control or throttle modes. There's an app attached to it. There's going to be, I was trying to figure out when KTM talks about it, they talk about theirs having whole shot assist and a quick shifter, like a quick shifter feature, but only for upshifting. And then Triumph talks about how you get shiftless upshift. So I'm trying to figure out if like the technology is the same. They're just calling it different things. But long story short, it seems like Triumph is coming out of the gate with a bike that is going to be pretty competitive with what you would expect from the latest and greatest in the way of technology in this class of motorcycles.
So, and we should note that Triumph is, along with all this hype and buildup for this bike, has been pointing out that Triumph has hired Ricky Carmichael and Ivan Cervantes and other sort of like famously successful and good off-road motocross, supercross riders. So I guess my question, because I feel like we're coming to the end of the 3 minutes here, though the alarm has not gone off yet, I don't think. Spurgeon Dunbar, do you think Triumph can succeed in a sort of classic sense? Do you think Triumph can win races with this motorcycle? Do you think it's going to be good enough?
I think so. I'm sorry, we're out of time. Well, fortunately, that buzzer is arbitrary, and our producer has no real control over us. Triumph has proven time and time again that they're able to come into the motorcycling world with new products and win, right? And I'm using air quotes for win because they win on the sales floor. And I think a lot of people were surprised when when Bloor came back and brought Triumph back from the dead to begin with, and their products have been, quite frankly, superior in a lot of ways. You look at what they did with the 675 class, and Daytona and the Daytona motorcycle line. Like, I think there's a lot of examples where Triumph comes in and stirs things up from the tradition. So I'm excited, and I think we can probably talk about this a little bit more as we get into the episode. The real question that I think everybody's asking is 2024 the year that Suzuki finally puts an electric start on their motorcycles? Triumph has that on their 250 line.
Right. That was smart too, because Suzuki takes a lot of whipping in the off-road community and motocross community for that. Or certainly has up to this point. Well, if you are really into motocross, you're probably not listening to Highside, Lowside for our in-depth breakdowns of motocross and supercross racing or technical breakdowns of the machines. But Spurgeon and I cannot help but be interested and excited about a company like Triumph, which is obviously, aside from their adventure line, so road focused, to be diving into full-on off-road competition. So it's exciting.
Yep, and I have more thoughts on this as we get in the episode, but I want to wait for Lance Oliver to be here to join us as we talk a little bit more about that. So again, for those of you that are just tuning in 15 minutes into a podcast, we are talking about things that we are excited about in 2024. We'll rehash a little bit of what we saw in 2023, but to do any of that, we need Lance Oliver himself, the Silver Fox, to join us on this program. Lance, welcome back. We are in the future. I know that we're recording this in 2023, but when this releases, it'll be 2024. How do you feel about being 6 weeks older than you are right now?
I don't know, about the same way I felt 6 weeks ago. Spurgeon, it's just always so exciting to be on the only podcast that's bold enough to name itself after ways we crash our motorcycles. That's all I can say. It's always a thrill.
Well, it's great to have you, Lance, as always. You're always so humble with your guest pieces here on Highside, Lowside, but you have to know that the listeners and viewers, they love you. They love you to death. And so we're excited to have you. And it is fair for Spurgeon to point out that we are recording this middle of December 2023. So if and when we cover some sort of topic or set of motorcycles coming in 2024, and there's some sort of egregious error that we make by leaving out the brand new Ducati spaceship bike or whatever it is, if it was announced in January, that's why. Just throwing it out there.
There you go. And I think there's already, it's been really interesting for us too, because, we've had so many invites for press launches leading up into December. At the time of recording this, the Triumph Tiger 900 press launch is going on in Europe. We know that there's going to be a Ducati Desert X Rally press launch that's not going to be talked about in this episode. That'll happen before it releases. So there's definitely a lot of motorcycle content hitting as of recently, and we're going to try to do our best to cover as much up to the moment details as we can in this particular episode right now.
As we do each year, as we did last year, right, Spurge?
Yeah. So I think, Lance, any other qualifying statements that you want to say before we jump in and get started?
No, let's get started.
Nice.
All right. So I do think it's worthwhile mentioning that in March of 23, we did an episode talking about what we were excited and looking forward to in the coming year. So it's now the end of that year. And I don't know about the other two of you on this episode, but I did some research and I went back and I re-listened to that episode, and there were a couple of things that the two of you discussed or that you were excited about. And I'm interested to see if you, one, remember the bikes that you were excited about, and two, whether or not they lived up to your expectations and potential.
You're going to hold our predictions against us? I love it. Fire away, Spurge.
Well, Zach, one of the things that you were most excited about in 2023 was the X-Max scooter. And I did some research, and to my knowledge, I don't. You were actually most excited about the fact that the technology on the X-Max scooter was really something that you were looking forward to trying out. Did you get to ride an X-Max scooter?
No, they stonewalled us. That is particularly funny. And I need to throw Yamaha under the bus here to a certain extent in order to tell this story. However, I would like to proudly remind Yamaha and everyone else that we have a perfectly good relationship with that company. But yeah, it was a strange situation. We got invited to the launch of the new X-Max, and I'm a pro scooter motorcyclist. I very much have enjoyed scooters in my career on two wheels, and I continue to do so. And the new X-Max seemed kind of exciting. Seemed like cool. Got cool tech, a new dash, TFT navigation, whatever, cool stuff. We get invited to launch, and then it gets postponed. So they're sorry, we're not going to do that. Actually, it's going to have to happen later. Okay, no problem. Somewhere around this point, I assume, is when I told you guys I was excited to ride it, and then it never came around. And then I followed up and asked Yamaha about it, and yeah, it was just the press was never officially invited to try that bike, though I do believe it is in showrooms somewhere, somehow, and I'm not sure what that means. I'm not going to speculate to the sort of what that suggests, politically or economically for anything. I'm just saying that's what happened, and it's particularly funny that I said I was excited to ride that bike, the 400cc scooter or whatever it is, and I never got to.
So I will just say that maybe one of the predictions for 2024 is hopefully we get to see an X-Max scooter on Daily Rider and a commentary article from you. Yeah,
I would.
So Lance,
I still want to try it.
I'm looking forward to it. And Lance, one of the things that you left us with was that you were, if you could have added any bike to your garage in 2023, you were going to potentially add the Kawasaki ZX4RR. So did that happen? Did you?
I never said any such thing.
I could be getting my facts wrong here. It's happened before, but I'm pretty sure that was the bike that you had picked as one that you would be interested in adding to your garage.
No. We had a lot of discussion with the ZX4. I mean, I don't know that any motorcycle was discussed more last year than the ZX4RR. We had
fair enough
discussion on podcasts. We've had multiple stories on Common Tread. It's gotten more than its fair share of exposure. But no, from a personal standpoint, it's not something that I plan to ever own. It would be interesting to ride.
Did you add any bikes to your garage in 2023?
Unfortunately, I did not. I did do some light shopping, but haven't found a bargain yet. So you know how I am. Pretty cheap, pretty thrifty.
Oh, I know. I know.
So Spurge, did you in all your research of what we said last year, did you find anything that you said that was particularly interesting or off base?
Never.
No. Your predictions were right on the money, and you.
No. I just didn't find anything I said interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny. We had done a little roundtable at the end about bikes that if we're going to add one bike from the year to the garage, which one it would have been, and I my pick holds up. I think I picked the new Triumph Street Triple RS. It's still a favorite. I think it's a bike that I think sometimes gets forgotten about or overlooked. But from a price standpoint, from a value standpoint, it's one of the ones that I think is still just such a screaming deal of a motorcycle for everything you get with that bike.
Agreed.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Wrapping up 23 thoughts though.
Yes.
Because this is a bike that you did get to ride, Zach. X-Max aside, you said that one of the bikes that you were most excited to ride, and the bike that if you had to pick just based on paper, that you would add to your garage because you were looking for something a bit more common when Lance was talking about adding a ZX4RR. And I really do look forward to going back and see if we can find that clip where Lance is now promising us that he didn't say that, if we can find the clip where he said that. So maybe I am misremembering, but if not, we'll make sure to throw the clip in there. But Zach, you were actually really excited about the Transalp. And you just recently got to spend some time with the Transalp. But you said that of all the bikes that we talked about, the Transalp would be one that you would be considering to add to your garage just because it's an all-arounder. You were really excited about that bike. You've had time to ride it.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on the Transalp, and do they hold up to what your predictions almost a year ago might have been?
So I think that what's interesting about the Transalp is that all the sort of like it was released in Europe before we got it here in the United States. And a lot of the sort of like rumblings that I was hearing from consumers and I guess mostly consumers, not even other motorcycle publications or anything, was that the motor was like the engine in the bike was really good. And they also have there's also the Hornet there, right? The sort of naked bike with the same engine, I believe. And there's all this talk about how much better that bike was than the Suzuki GSX 8S, which is also a parallel twin of about the same size. And I kept thinking, like, I don't buy it. I don't, people think that the Honda engine is going to be the one that's all spicy and interesting. That doesn't really add up. Honda is often the company that produces bikes that make great sense and are well built and practical, but don't have a lot of fire in their belly, in my opinion and experience. So I was worried about that for the Transalp because while it seemed like it would be a practically good bike, I thought it might be a little bit dull, frankly speaking. And now that I've had a chance to ride it, it completely exceeded expectations. Fabulous engine. Really, really good. I mean, nicer than it needed to be for that price point. It's a $10,000 bike with just a jewel of an engine, in my opinion. Just excellent power, great sound, great feel. It feels sort of like heavy and substantial in all the right ways, though it's not a lot heavier. Really, it's a little bit heavier than a Tenere 700 or a Touareg 660. So, to answer your question, Spurge, fantastic motorcycle. I don't think it looks very good, and the fact that it's ride-by-wire and doesn't have cruise control is extremely frustrating, but fantastic bike. I'd be proud to have one in my garage.
All right, so your thoughts hold up, Lance. We'll wrap up 2023 thoughts, or at least move on from 2023 thoughts and start looking into the future. But of all the bikes that were released in 2023, was there one that was a favorite for you? that you're kind of heading into 24 being happy that it did come to fruition?
Well, I hate to repeat what Zach just said, but I mean, we saw that there was a lot of interest among our readers in the Transalp, and I think the fact that it came in and, as Zach just said, exceeded expectations makes it really one of the notable bikes of the year, I think.
Right on. Yeah, and if for those of you listening that might not know exactly what we're talking about, Liz Canary went to the press launch for us on that one. She did an excellent review. They actually went out on a section of the BDR here in Pennsylvania, and they did a ride of that bike. And then, of course, Zach has a Daily Rider episode of the Transalp. So there's a lot of information out there on that. And for those of you that are interested in Lance's pick that he didn't add to his garage, the ZX4RR, there was a lot of talk about that bike. Lance and I were just having a conversation the other day about Dylan Code of California Superbike School wrote an article for us where they took out, was it a Graves prep?
Yeah, it was a Graves prepared track only version. Actually, they make several different levels. You can sort of purchase the level of performance you want on that bike, and it's totally altered and customized for track use.
Yeah, so and that's just the most recent article we have on that bike. There's a lot of content we did on the
Yes.
ZX4RR in 2023 as well. So we check out Common Tread over on RevZilla.com for more information on any of these models that we're talking about. But
Except the X Max. We got no content on the X Max.
but
No,
it's coming.
nothing.
2024 is going to be the year, baby.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Gosh, I hope so.
For those of you just listening and not watching, Zach has his fingers crossed. He is
Quite literally.
He is gunning for one.
Yes,
so
indeed.
let's move
All right.
on to things that we're excited about in the future. And on our list, the first category is adventure and off-road.
Oh,
So-
isn't that convenient? The first thing we're going to talk about is ADV Bikes. Spurge,
But
you have anything
I'm
to do
not
with this?
going to go. I'm not going to go first. We're going to start with guest honors as
Guest
always.
honors. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Lance, what are you excited about in the ADV/off-road category?
Oh,
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Come on, Spurgeon. You know, I'm sitting here in a virtual room with Zach Quartz and Spurgeon Dunbar, and I'm going to talk about ADVs. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Guest honors. That's how it works, man.
I'm the least dirty person in this group. And
Hang on. No, because I'm not going to touch that one. This is a family podcast, Lance. But no, Lance is being really humble right now because we have had numerous conversations around the potential bikes that he almost bought this past year were all dual sport or tiny adventure bikes. So you're trying, baby. You want to be an adventure rider. You just haven't made the plunge yet.
I need to start with the baby steps, and my adventure riding chops are that I am thinking about maybe starting with baby steps. So yeah, as far as I mean, I think if we're going to talk about something that's a real interesting development, I think the obvious one that I would look at is the new Royal Enfield Himalayan. I mean, it's
divisive.
It is. It is. Some people.
Is it? Well, explain that. Why is it? I didn't actually know it's divisive. Why is
Well,
that?
so we just had an article in Common Tread about it because Dustin Whelan went to India and rode the thing.
Yeah.
And some readers thought, wow, this is great. This puts this on my radar where it never was before. I didn't even consider a Royal Enfield Himalayan, and now I'm kind of thinking about one. And then there were other readers who chimed in and said, well, this just takes away all the charm from the motorcycle.
Right,
There are those
sure.
who wanted that original. So just to set the scene for people who might not be familiar with the model that much, the previous Himalayan was the old style air-cooled engine and very low tech, but then also the sort of motorcycle that a lot of people feel they can maintain and repair and do all the work themselves in the garage in a spare half hour. And then now they've replaced that with a totally new liquid-cooled engine.
Right.
And a little bit different styling, and so it's more capable. So it just depends on whether you're looking for something that's still affordable and a relatively small and manageable and accessible motorcycle, but a little more modern in design, or whether you just like the old throwback air-cooled engine like Royal Enfield's been making since the days of the British Empire.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny.
Just to clarify, the previous gen Himalayan was the 411cc air cooled engine, but
Yes.
that wasn't that wasn't really the old unit construction. Like it wasn't the same as the truly old. Yeah, they had a counterbalancer and so on and so forth. It was a little bit more modern. But your point, I understand now, which is that it's divisive because it's a real, moving from air cooling to liquid cooling is a big step away from the sort of tradition and heritage of the brand.
It's a total shift for Royal Enfield. I mean, Dustin in his article described it as, he talked about how the Himalayas were formed by tectonic activity, and he said the new Himalayan is a tectonic shift for Royal Enfield.
I loved the just a quick sidebar here on Dustin's writing, which we've all got lots of love for Dustin these days, a new member of our staff in 2023. He had that whole thing about how the Himalayas were formed by the plates hitting each other, and so now the mountains are still rising because technically the plates are still hitting each other. And will this model, this Himalayan, continue to rise just as the mountains do? Because terrific. Great pieces of writing. Just throwing that out there. I know Dustin doesn't listen to this podcast, I'm sure. But anyway, if you want to read a great article about the Himalayan, Dustin did a banger.
I'll assign him to listen to the podcast, and then
perfect. Thanks, appreciate that.
Well, no, I think that where my commentary comes from is in addition to Dustin's article, it then got brought up again in we did an end of year article around our favorite motorcycles of 2023. The Himalayan got mentioned in that. And it was actually one of our commenters. There was an individual named Lauren who owns and he has the original version. And he had made a comment about how he was actually really disappointed. And I had asked him, could you explain a little bit why? And he wrote a really great comment. So I think one of the things that I really like about the Common Tread comment section is we have a lot of really intelligent and thoughtful readers that sometimes add context that we might not have. So if you're looking at the article for our favorite motorcycles of 2023, head down to the comment section and look for a comment by an individual named Lauren. And it was just very thoughtful commentary on why the new version might not be something that existing owners are looking for.
The same Lauren who has written a couple of Common Tread articles,
is that the really doctor?
Great. Yes. No, this is the former fighter pilot.
I got you. Physicians, fighter pilots, I can't tell the difference. While we're throwing out compliments, I will say that there's a great thing about the Common Tread ecosystem. Where written articles are published at RevZilla.com. If you're not familiar, our friend Lance here is the managing editor, and he has done a good job curating a community where people feel comfortable, expressing their opinions. And there's often a lot of comments and discussion underneath those articles, which I think is great. I would, though, since I have the feather, I'd like to pivot and bring up a pretty obvious splash that was made in the ADV world for 2024, sort of, which is the new R1300 GS. A flagship BMW Boxer Twin GS is I don't know, if it's not atop the Mount Olympus of adventure bikes, it is near the top always and has been for quite some time. And so anytime it gets a big update, that's significant, right? I mean, it's sort of it sort of has to be talked about. And so
absolutely.
I guess I'm curious what you guys think about that bike.
I am looking at a GS 1300 that's lighter, that is a completely different kind of styling design.
True.
I think, there's definitely been some commentary on whether or not it looks less like a BMW and more like some of the existing Japanese adventure bikes. But it definitely is a bike that I can't imagine existing GS owners aren't going to want to gravitate towards. And I can't imagine people looking for a top tier adventure bike, aren't going to continue to look at the GS 1300 as, a pinnacle bike in the segment. That's what BMW has done for years with this model. And I think from what I read from Spencer's article, because I didn't go to this launch and we haven't seen one in person yet, but it looks like BMW is listening to the trend and is looking at the trend of what people are asking for out of their adventure bikes, which is, bikes that are a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit more off-road capable. And it seems like the GS 1300, and also the one that I'm most excited about in BMW's line that we haven't really seen yet is the F900 that's been released in Europe.
Right. So, the new version of the parallel twin. Yeah, for sure. Well, before we pivot away from the R1300 GS, Lance, do you have any thoughts? I only have one more.
No, you're absolutely right. It's the benchmark by which others in the class are measured. I do think it'll be interesting if you guys can get a hold of one out there on the RevZilla West Coast office and put it on the scales and see
Yeah.
if we can get an accurate idea of just how much lighter it is, because there are some people who are questioning BMW's claims that it's all that much lighter.
Right.
So I guess it depends on what you
Package.
what you include in the package you choose. Is how
Right.
complicated BMW's system is of buy this package or that package, and
Right.
a base motorcycle is the rarest thing in the BMW world.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, I guess the one thing that I would want Highside, Lowside listeners to take away, well, two things. One, you should read the First Ride article on the website, because I think that Spencer did quite a good job. And if you're a Taylor Swift fan, you'll enjoy it even more. I'll just throw that out there. But the big takeaway that I got from his article was sort of like, it doesn't feel that much different than an R1250. And of course, it is different from an engineering standpoint, from a styling standpoint. There are things that are clearly different. And yet he said the feel was pretty similar. And I think it's an interesting place that BMW finds itself in, which is that, one, you don't want to change the bike like that too much, because it already has such a solid foundation, such a solid customer base of people that just like it the way it is, right? And two, how much can you change a bike that is already so refined? How every motorcycle in every category gets to this place where, how do you make it better without isolating or not isolating, but sort of excluding certain segments of the market, right? If you make it too off-road capable, then all the guys that want to tour on it are like, well, I don't know. And then if you make it, too road capable, then all the people that want to ride it off-road are like, well, is it even an adventure bike anymore? So it always has to be this compromise. And I think it's quite interesting that this R1300 GS launch was a big deal, and BMW put a lot of money behind it and a lot of effort, clearly. And Spencer rode an R1250 GS around in California for a couple weeks before he went to Spain to ride the new bike. And he got there, and his very first impression was, yeah, kind of feels like it's felt for a while now, which I just think is an interesting thing. And I don't know if it's good or bad. I just find it intriguing.
Well, I think there's 2 points that you made there that I want to hit on. First one, we're going to push pause on, because I think we're going to hit it more in a later category. But at a certain point, how do you change these motorcycles? We're going to talk about KTM introducing a new 990 and 1390. The 990 is now their small bike. The 990 used to be the biggest bike you could buy. Yeah. So totally. At a certain point, you can't just keep adding displacement to these bikes. So what do you change about them to continue to get people to buy new versions, right? Yeah. So I think that's something it's going to be a reckoning in general for a lot of OEMs. But what I do think is a solution, or what I do think is maybe a trend, and I talked about this, well, I submitted this in a Common Tread article that hasn't been released at the time of recording. Whether or not Lance completely edits my copy is another story. But what I tried to submit an article on was one of the trends that I really see kind of taking place in 2024 is, when we're talking about the adventure bike segment, there is this shift in more off-road focused adventure bikes, right? We talk about the fact that, KTM introduced the rally version in 2020 with the 790, and then the bike that I have is a 2021. They are bringing that back for 2024. So there's a rally edition of the 890. There were 700 models released. They sold out within a couple of days. Ducati is introducing a very off-road focused version of the Desert X, a bike that was already more off-road oriented than any other adventure bike in their line. They're now making even more off-road focused. There's a Tenere 700 that was just announced called the Extreme Package, which apparently we're not getting in America. And that's another thing to talk about here is Yamaha. Why are you not bringing these Tenere 700 variants into America? Because we arguably have the largest amount of land to go ride these bikes in off-road versus some of the European countries out there. But that is a trend that I think is a call out for the adventure class in 2024 is seeing, a way of differentiating these top tier models where I think OEMs identified, hey, there's a lot of people out there that are spending money putting upgraded suspensions on there with steering dampers or off-road wheels. So why don't we just offer a package and capitalize on that? And I think that is going to be a way that OEMs can differentiate their top tier models in the future.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, so we've already spent quite a bit of time on adventure bikes. I'd like to just sort of do some quick hit stuff here. This small list of bikes we have listed here. One of which I am kind of excited about. Which
Can
is
I guess?
Sure, yeah, guess.
The CF Moto 450 MT.
Correct.
You can't see it, folks, but there's a smile on this boy's face a mile wide.
That engine is great. I believe this is the same engine that's in the 450 SS sport bike, which is a 270 crank parallel twin. So it's a sort of like oddball firing order parallel twin, similar to a Triumph Bonneville or a Yamaha MT-07 or something like that. But it's small, right? It's a little 450cc engine. It sounds great. It's fun to use, and it's compact. And CF Moto is going to throw it in a small ADV, sort of like Dakar rally styled motorcycle. And I think that's a great idea, because I think that a lot of the small adventure bikes are a little bit kind of like dull. They're a little bit feeble, you know. Some of the ones that have 21-inch front wheels, like a Honda CRF 300 Rally, is a pretty kind of like soft and heavy bike, really, for sort of like true adventure riding, even though it is small and approachable, which is all well and good. And then there's just other, even the KTM 390 is a 19-inch front wheel, and the BMW G310 GS, 19-inch front wheel, and regardless of wheel size or whatever, I just think that this CF Moto has potential. It's a really punchy engine that I really enjoyed, and it seems like it's sort of aggressive in a way that might be exciting and fun.
I'm waiting to see if Lance wants to jump in here, because I mean, the comment that I was going to make is that CF Moto did it before Kawasaki. We've been talking for, I feel like, quite a long time on this podcast.
I mean, 3-4 years, 5 years.
Why does the Versys X 300 not have the 400 platform in it, right? Especially
and now
with
there's a
what we saw with
engine.
the Eliminator.
Yeah.
Like, why hasn't Kawasaki done that? The other thing, to piggyback off your point, you know, we talked about a recap of 2023. CF Moto is a manufacturer that is coming out very strong over the past year. They seem like they're pushing very strong into 2024. You know, 2024 could easily be the year that CF Moto becomes a household name for a lot of motorcyclists looking for something more affordable and looking for something that, frankly, gives them a slightly different option than what the existing class of motorcycles, you know, has brought to the market so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a yeah, I CF Moto has been a mixed bag thus far of kind of, you know, bikes that are really kind of like copycat models, like they have a bike called the 650 Adventura, which is just a Versus 650 knockoff, and it is not a good knockoff. It doesn't work well. It's very hollow and disappointing. And then there's bikes like that 450 SS, which is you'd be like, oh, it's just a Kawasaki. It's just a Ninja 400 ripoff. And then you ride it and you're like, whoa, it's not that at all. It's like, it feels different. It sounds different. It looks different. It has different features. It's a whole new thing. It's great. So you're never quite sure what you're going to get, which is fun. You know, like from our perspective, not from a consumer perspective, but you can tell that CF Moto, like you said, is really trying to build this reputation of building, you know, unique and worthy motorcycles. So it's exciting. Yeah. I think you said it, Spurge.
Lance, anything you want to add there?
Lance doesn't want to talk about adventure bikes anymore. He made that clear, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, I haven't ridden the CF Moto bikes like Zack and Ari have out on the West Coast, so I don't really have anything to add.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up with we did talk about Lance before you jumped on. We talked about a Not the News episode. Or not the news segment about Triumph's new TF 250X. They're entering into the motocross world. We also heard an announcement that Ducati is planning on a 2025 model. I believe Ducati's looking at getting into the adventure world. You know, we know
motocross.
Motocross world. Sorry, motocross world. We know that, you know, the dirt segment continues to be a very hot segment of sales in America. I am interested to see not so much what comes out of this 250 from Triumph as far as a motocross, you know, podium placement machine. But do we think that there's going to be a Triumph dual sport in the future built on a similar chassis and platform?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. They're going to start with the motocross bike to get make a splash and get a lot of publicity and hopefully positive publicity. And the idea is, I'm sure, probably the second step, I would guess, and I don't have any inside knowledge, but my guess would be then we would have an enduro off-road bike and gradually work towards more consumer friendly other single cylinder models. Obviously, they're not going to have the same highly tuned, high maintenance motocross engine that is in the 250. But Triumph says they're going to, we're going to see them racing the 250, and before this podcast is even out, once
Right.
Supercross begins, and then next year they're going to have a 450. So they seem to be all in, as they say.
On the gas, I believe, is the
or that, yeah,
motorcycle.
Appropriate, baby. All right, so we're going to move on to the sports segment. Lance, in closing for Adventure Bikes, if you could add one adventure bike to your garage in 24, which one would it be? Dual sport adventure bike, Lance.
The practical choice or the
I don't know. I'm going to bring it up next year, though, and you're going to tell me you didn't say it.
It's free. It's free. You're not buying it.
Yeah.
You won the lottery. You get one free motorcycle. What do you have in, Lance?
I mean, okay, so as a practical matter, I actually would like to have a 250 dual sport. I moved this year, and there's all these nice little dirt roads around me, and places I'd like to explore on something that isn't going to throw me down into a ravine if I slip and slide on street tires.
Pick one. What is it? Which one?
I've been looking at like a CRF 300 or a KLX 300, something along that. Okay. Nice, friendly little bike. But I also have to say, if you're going to give me a free bike and it's going to be an adventure bike, I'd have to look pretty hard at the Transalp.
All right. Zach, you concur? You're shaking your head in a way that you don't... I can't tell if you're going to be a BMW in the garage or a Transalp in the garage.
Part of me wants to just take the risk and say, like, give me one of those CF motos. I'm excited. I think it's going to be good. But I'm not going to say that now. If any free new adventure bike in the garage is going to be a GS. Even if every single review was it hasn't gotten any better than a 1250 GS, it's exactly the same, it'd still be my choice.
All right. Well, I'm not giving up my KTM Rally, so I'm keeping that as my adventure bike in the garage. But if I had to pick one that was coming out this year, the one that I am the most excited about is I really want to try the new BMW 900. That's the one that I think is probably the one that I'm jazzed about. And it'll be interesting to see exactly what those changes to the Ducati Desert X Rally pan out to be. So that's another one that I'm excited to try in the coming year.
So
sport bikes?
Yeah, let's move on to sport bikes. There's plenty of action in that category. And I actually am going to start with a little bit of an off-kilter take. I'm just going to back my way into the sport bike category a little bit, which is, you were talking about how the Royal Enfield Himalayan is kind of divisive because of what we talked about, right? Like, it's liquid cooled now, not air cooled. And so some people think it's a move forward and some people think it's a move away from what made the brand good, blah, blah, blah. I think it's interesting that a single cylinder engine is sort of like not just I don't think Royal Enfield is reaching necessarily just for that bike to be a flagship within its own line, but also a flagship in the category, right? In the sort of like small adventure bike category, to have that bike be one of the best options. That's the impression that I'm under anyway. And I think it's, other brands use singles, but a lot of other brands, CF Moto or Kawasaki, use twin cylinder engines in that category of motorcycle. I think that the fact that Ducati is building that single cylinder hyper motard, is hyper motard mono, super motard mono, hyper mono motard, whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's all those.
The hyper motard 698.
Copy. I think the engine specifically is some sort of super mono thing that they call it, right? Yeah. Whatever. I misremember.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's half of a super quadro. I mean, who can keep it all straight?
So anyway, I think it's interesting that the Himalayan is reaching to be a sort of premium product in that category with a single cylinder engine. And now Ducati's come out with this single cylinder engine that is reaching to be a premium product as well, just as most Ducati products are reaching to be some sort of premium specification. And I don't think if you had told me a year or two ago that I would be able to get excited about a sort of mid-size motorcycle with a single cylinder engine, I don't think I would have been able to do that. I think I would have said, no, I don't, that might not be my cup of tea. I appreciate singles for what they are, but they don't serve this one purpose. This Hypermotard 698, talking about quite a bit of horsepower. It seems like a real kind of return to the sort of like glory and fire of an actual supermoto machine. And I appreciate the Ducati's doing that. I think it's exciting, and I wouldn't have expected it from a single cylinder platform in general.
It looks insane. I mean, if you're just looking, I mean, just looking at the photos, I remember this was one of Patrick Garvin's picks. For favorite bikes of the year. Obviously we haven't ridden it yet, but yeah, I mean, it looks awesome. Yeah,
you're looking at it's supposedly 77 horsepower and 333 pounds. So, I mean, what else are you going to get in a sub 350 pound package? I mean,
How does that compare? With the Kramer that you rode was more than that, right? Because that was the parallel twin, or was the Kramer the single cylinder, or the big single?
The one I rode in the Czech Republic in July, last July. That was a twin. That was the 890 KTM engine, and that makes something like 140 horsepower, or something like that. But the Kramer single that I also raced, which is called the Evo 2, I think. No, that can't be right. 690R, whatever. It's got a KTM 690 single in it. And that bike made something like 75, 80 horsepower, I believe. Still, you can still get one of those Kramers, I should say. It still does make 75 or 80 horsepower. And because it's prepped for racing, it's quite a bit lighter. I think it's sub 300 pounds, actually.
Wow.
And that bike is a riot on a racetrack. It is just an absolute scalpel. One of the best, most capable, just fantastically rewarding bikes I've ridden on a racetrack. So the fact that this new Hypermotard 698 is kind of scratching at that level of power to weight ratio and I don't know, and sort of like type of power delivery is certainly exciting. It's cool.
Well, I would say you use the term scalpel, so that opens us up to a KTM conversation, because when the 790 Duke was released, they called it the scalpel. And, we hinted at this earlier, but the 790 has become the 890. The 890 is now being announced that there's a 990 variant. So, Lance, Zach, does the world need a 990cc, quote unquote, middleweight sport bike?
This podcast isn't long enough for me to get started on this, because we actually had a recent discussion about this in the reader comments on one of our stories at Common Tread. And I said, this is just the human way. It's not even limited to motorcycles. Everything keeps getting bigger and bigger. And we've seen it time and time with motorcycles. You see it with cars, as someone in our reader comments pointed out, a Honda Civic today is way bigger than what a Honda Accord was, 30 years ago. And then everything grows, and then you have to make something new to slot in at the low end of the segment where you abandon because you kept making everything bigger. And it's just the way we go. It's insanity, but that's human nature. You have to, as Spurgeon said before, how are you going to keep improving things? Well, the easy way to do it is make it bigger and more powerful. And then suddenly you've abandoned the class that it started out in.
Which is, I think, quick sidebar, one of the things that's happened with the Ducati Hypermotard line, right? It's turned into, it's grown. It came out a long time. It was, what's that model line, 15 years old or something? There's an air-cooled 1100, and then there was I forget what the original smaller engine was, the 937 engine or something like that, or maybe it was even the 800, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, it was a sort of like, cool, this is the small, simple, bare bones Ducati. And then it grew and grew until it was a $17,000 or $18,000 SP with Olin suspension and 100 and whatever horsepower, And so building down from there is the only thing that really makes sense. And to your point, Spurge, it's a tricky thing. Ducati's in the same thing right now. The Ducati Panigale V2 is a 955, I think, a 955cc V twin, which is the quote unquote midsize bike, which of course is bigger than the 916, which came out, granted, 30 years ago or something now. But it's funny how now midsize bikes are just as big as flagships used to be. And I don't know, there's, like, as Lance said, maybe that's another podcast. What do you think?
There you go.
Why is engine creep a real thing? Well, let's pause on this discussion because it can be a whole separate thing, but it is intriguing.
We had a very similar discussion in last year's episode, where, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but I had talked about the Transalp and why don't you just go buy a used Africa Twin? Because if you look at the specs on paper,
Yeah.
the Transalp was making similar power, ratios as the original Africa Twin before it had, the
original new Africa Twin that came out in whatever it was,
exactly.
2014 or something. Yeah.
So we had a very similar conversation about this, but when I'm thinking about looking at Ducati, or that KTM is going to be coming out with that 1390,
yeah,
I am really interested to see how much power they're going to be eking out of that engine, because the Super Duke, as it stands right now, is if the regular 890 990 Duke was the scalpel, the Super Duke was the beast. And my God, Zach, I don't think there's anyone here that has more experience with that bike than you do, at least in the three of us. And like, how amazing was that 1290 engine? It's just, how do you make that more powerful?
It is a good question.
I mean, KTM is saying that the 1390 is 188 horsepower. That's what they're saying. 188 horsepower.
Which is,
I'm disappointed. I was hoping it was going to be 200.
I mean, it really is. If you've ridden, like I went to the revamp launch of the 1290 Super Duke. So I had to reason Spurgeon's pointing to me as the Super Duke expert is that I did have a long-term test bike when I was at Motorcycles Magazine. I put 10 or 11,000 miles on an original 1290 Super Duke, the 2014 or 15 model, whatever it was. So I have spent a lot of time on that bike, put saddlebags on it, toured on it, took it to track days, did the whole thing. And then I went to the revamp launch in 2017 when it got some more ride modes, more traction control, adjustability, that kind of thing, which was held at the Losail International MotoGP circuit in Qatar, and that has a long straightaway. And I will say that whatever they were claiming for horsepower in that bike, 175 maybe or something like that, by the time you get going down a long straightaway on that bike, and there's no fairing, you can't really tuck in behind anything aside from the gas tank and the TFT dash that's poking up above the handlebar. It really starts to pull on your head and pull on your body in a pretty vicious way. And it does make you wonder, at what point is there an amount of horsepower on a naked bike that will literally start peeling riders off at track days when they get to a braking zone and sit up and they just go, and get peeled off. I mean, the only thing I can say about the 1390 really is that, as absurd as it sounds, the 1290 Super Duke, I think, was and has been a brilliant beacon of absurdity in the motorcycling world. It's a fantastically capable bike, and sure, it's faster, the engine's big, and the looks are polarizing, whatever. It is an amazingly capable and fun machine, and I think that KTM has shaped it in a really brilliant way, and I can't do anything except be excited about the 1390, as ridiculous as it seems.
No, I think that they have done a great job with that particular motorcycle of just giving you something that pulls at your heartstrings. It might not be the most practical motorcycle you could add to your garage. It might not be the fastest bike to take around a track, but it will be something that will just give you an adrenaline rush like nothing else. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where that engine ends up, because I can't imagine that they're not going to update the Super Adventure S and the Super Adventure R with that engine, and really what that means in the world of adventure motorcycling, from a platform standpoint.
True enough. Yeah. I cross my fingers that I'll be able to ride that 1390. That would be fun. I would like to move along and address a group of bikes, I suppose, that I think is interesting. We had written down. I'm just going to sort of fire them off as a batch so that we can talk about them as a group. There's the Ducati Multistrada RS, which I think qualifies as a sport bike more than an adventure bike. Of course, Ducati's Multistrada is an adventure bike, but the RS has the Panigale V4 engine in it, and it's the 17-inch wheels and is very sporty. And then BMW released this M1000 XR, which again, the 1000 XR moniker is a sort of a street going sport touring quasi adventure bike, but the M1000 XR is like just sort of like viciously fast and has all sorts of sporting pedigree behind it. And then there's the Suzuki GSX-S 1000 GX. Is that right?
GX
Again,
Plus.
GX Plus. Thank you. That uses the ever-present, it seems, 1000cc engine from Suzuki, but that's in the GSX 1000 GT Plus. But now this GX Plus is sort of an upright version of that, a la Yamaha Tracer 9 or Kawasaki Versys 1000 or something like that. And I think it's interesting that we've included these bikes in sport, right? Like someone might look at a Multistrada and an S1000 or M1000 XR or whatever, and a GSX-S 1000 and think, well, these aren't really sport bikes, but they kind of are. And it's interesting, I think, that we can get so excited about the sporting pedigree of a bike that's so kind of like upright and ostensibly comfortable. But anyone who's ridden any of these bikes knows that they're pretty capable, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think Lance has spent the most time with what was the one that you had the long term where you rode it back from?
Yeah, I had the
Versys 1000, right?
The Versys 1000 SE LT. I mean, I would slice and dice this a little bit different from Zach, but I do think I also agree with him in that it's a really interesting segment. But I would put the BMW M1000 XR and the Multistrada RS in one category, just because they're so powerful and they're so expensive. But then I think there's another separate category that is, to me, very interesting, that I really didn't necessarily see coming a few years ago when I did do the long-term review on the Kawasaki Versys 1000 SE LT Plus, which was sort of the first. I mean, they're now using the term crossover, which I hate it when we borrow terms from cars. I think we should just make up our own terms, but whatever. But they're sort of the crossover motorcycle. So this year we have the GSX, the Suzuki GSX 1000 GX Plus. We're
going to give you a quiz on all these names later
exactly.
for the audience.
So we've got the Kawasaki Versys 1000, the new Suzuki 1000, and we have the Tracer 9 GT Plus.
Right.
So those three, to me, are a category. They all three are, similar in displacement, a liter or a little bit under. They all three have electrically adjustable suspension, which the Versys was the first on that with a couple years. But I'm kind of surprised that the new Suzuki that we saw, I wasn't really expecting that. I mean, they had the GT, which is sort of the classic sport tour, and now they came out with the GX, which is pretty much a direct competitor to the Kawasaki Versys. And then even, to screw things up, not screw things up, and make things even more interesting, Yamaha came in with the Tracer 9 GT Plus, which also has electronically adjustable suspension, and it undercuts the price of the others by about $2,000, and it brings in adaptive cruise control. So
that's right. Yamaha has that. I forgot that.
Yes, it's the only one that does. The others have regular cruise control, and that really scrambles that little category to me. We're not talking the $30,000 high performance, BMW, Ducati segment, but we're talking about this Japanese segment here of these three very similar bikes that are sport tours for people who want sort of adventure bike ergonomics, but they're very much street sport touring bikes. And there's a lot happening in that segment. I think it's really interesting.
So it's interesting because you mentioned Kawasaki as potentially one of the first, but if I remember correctly, it was actually the predecessor to the Tracer, which was the MT9.
FJ.
Yeah, there was the FJ. No, what I meant to say, I probably wasn't clear. Kawasaki was the first to take it to the next step with the electrically adjustable suspension, which now Suzuki and Yamaha have done too. The original, the first Versys 1000 didn't have the electronic suspension. And so now they've upped the game a little bit. They've gone more upscale, and the price has gone up a little bit. But Yamaha came in and undercut them on price. So
but that's what Yamaha's been doing, and it's interesting because I remember back to that first FJ09 when I got to ride one, and the thing was just insane. For the money, it was I think it was sub $10,000 when it was first introduced, and it had that was before they lengthened the swing arm. and it was just, you couldn't keep the front wheel on the ground. It was a wild machine. And then when they switched to the Tracer moniker, that's when they added like 1.5 or 2 inches of swing arm. They made it a little bit more touring friendly. Still, to steal a term from Zack, a vicious engine. And when you're looking at all those models next to each other within that Japanese kind of circle, the engine in the Yamaha is still just one of my favorites out there. Just a crazy engine full of character.
Agreed. It's a treat. Yeah, and I appreciate that you broke out those bikes the way you did, Lance, as sort of those European ones being, more aspirational, I guess.
I mean, the Ducati costs twice as much as the Suzuki.
Yeah, but I think that you could argue the Suzuki wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Ducati, which, it might not be. I mean, that is to say, none of them would exist had someone not built one of those bikes in the first place, right? I remember riding my first long-term test bike for Motorcycles magazine way back when was a 2012 Multistrada, which this was before there was before there was a Pikes Peak version, maybe even. It was before there was an Enduro. It was before that had sort of like that model line had fractured into all these different, or had grown all these branches on that tree, and I took that bike to a track day and it was a riot. And I think those kind of models that come out and do that kind of thing are why we start to see other companies building into the gaps. And so is Ducati's most recent release is that like wild, $30,000 thing with a Panigale engine and whatnot. But I think that the reason that I grouped them together is because they're all related to each other from an economic and from a consumer standpoint, because
38,000 for that Ducati RS. Yeah.
Okay. I changed my mind. That's the one I want.
The look on Zach's face right now is wow.
I didn't realize it was that expensive.
Yeah. I think we're touching on something here where this is a category of motorcycles that we've put into sport. I think oftentimes the sport bike purist would be that him or her is probably staring at the screen or listening to their stereo right now, screaming at us that we are absolutely wrong in this. But like, I've seen people at track days on an S1000 XR just smoking people on regular sport bikes. These are truly competitive machines. They are absolutely wonderful,
potent,
wonderful feats of engineering, and they're more comfortable for everyday use. So you really do get the best of both worlds from a sport performance standpoint and from a comfort standpoint. And I think it also bears mention that this isn't a category that's new. We talked about pre-proing for this episode, the Tiger Sport 1050, which had gone away in America, existed in Europe up until recently, but that was a bike that was introduced not long after the Multistrada. And it was a bike that unfortunately just never caught on, but it was a great machine. And if you're looking at for a really great used motorcycle, a Tiger Sport 1050 is a hell of a bargain for what you get. And now you're looking at this new class. And I would agree with Lance that, in the world of the Japanese manufacturers, some of these bikes are bargains for the performance you get from them and for what you can do with them, whether that's a track day on one hand or it's a 10-day cross-country tour on the other.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that it's interesting that we're more excited. Like on other bikes we had on this list, which we should cover post haste, I feel, would be Honda sort of re-releasing the CBR 600 RR, which is a classic. So that's a true sport bike, since we're talking about the sport category. Or
re-releasing it in Europe. Is it? I don't think it did it go away in America?
No, it did not go away in the United States, but it went away in Europe, and now it's coming back in Europe.
Okay, right. But I believe the U.S. market is getting the updated version, right? Because it's been revamped for Euro 5 or whatever it is, I believe. The point is, it's not especially new, and that's probably why we're not excited about it in the same way we're excited about all these other models. But it is, I guess for that matter, the Aprilia RS 457, which is like Aprilia coming out with a small sport bike. Like, I don't know, why aren't we more excited about that? Maybe we're just like old dudes who like riding fast sometimes.
No. I think I think the RS457 is a bike that I am excited to see hit. I don't think we've really, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's not a bike that we've seen stateside yet. Jen went and saw the release or the unveiling of it, but we haven't gotten a chance to ride it yet. But
True.
I'm excited to see that bike hit. I'm excited to see what that bike is from a platform standpoint, because I could see Aprilia. You're talking about CF Moto creating this little hot parallel twin adventure bike. Knowing what Aprilia did with their Touareg, I could see Aprilia doing a pretty cool adventure bike off of that platform. It's already looking like it's going to be a pretty competent little sport bike platform. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot that they could probably do there.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah. It's always interesting when there's a new actual platform, right? Instead of like a new model that's sort of either revamped or, using an existing engine and something else, that kind of thing.
Oh, I think we'll see, but I think, the United States market is really an afterthought when it comes to that model, because it's primarily there to be a model for Europe where riders with an A2 license are limited to 47 horsepower. And so we're an afterthought. We may get it. They may do other things, but that's not why it exists.
Yeah, that's fair. Although I know I live in California, but I see a lot of small sport bikes around. And I like to think that it's a legitimate market,
All right, so we need to move on.
We should probably move on.
We need to get we have to move on, but we have to get in a word from our sponsor Motul before we let Motul take the reins. Lance, guest honors. If you were going to add a sport bike to your stable in 2024, is there anything that piques your fancy more so than the rest?
I mean, I'm not sure which one I would end up going for. I'd like to try them, but I think those three Japanese quote crossovers, to use a word I don't want to use, I think there's such a sweet spot of capability. You can take a long tour on them. You can ride them on a sport ride. You can do anything on them, and they're really appealing to me for that reason.
And you and I both liked that Gixxis GT Plus, the Source Sport Tour one. So it stands to reason that we would enjoy the GX Plus. Yeah, it's
going to be pretty much the same, maybe just a little bit different ergonomics, I think.
Yeah. Yep. I gotta go Super Duke. I'm too excited about that.
Well, I don't have nearly the capabilities that Mr. Quartz has, so I would probably be looking at the 990 Duke as fair.
Also probably going to be plenty fast.
I would say plenty potent for me. So with that, we're going to put a pause on sport bikes. We're going to get to Motul, and then we're going to come back and we're going to jump into standard motorcycles. But first, let's let Motul take over for a minute. All right. Well, we are back from the break. Hopefully you enjoyed that lovely ad from Motul. And Zach and Lance and I were talking while Motul was advertising to you, and we thought of something.
So, in the interest of full disclosure, realized that this is a very sort of like nomenclature heavy podcast, where we're throwing a lot of names and types of bikes and CCs and engine sizes and models and whatever out there. And we have gotten some feedback in the past that riders, especially riders that are newer to motorcycling, are a little bit overwhelmed by all the different, a lot of the jargon lingo that we throw out there. So if you have questions about any of the models that we discussed, we're going to do our level best to put links to all of the articles about these machines on Common Tread in the YouTube description. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can look below. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find this podcast on YouTube and find links to all the bikes that we're talking about, and hopefully give yourself some more context.
There you go. Because there's nothing, if no shortage of good articles over on Common Tread, a site that Lance manages and keeps Zach and I in line with to the best of his ability. So speaking of Lance, let's jump into this with a guest honors. The segment we're moving on to now is the standard motorcycle segment. So when we're talking about standard motorcycles as they are defined, typically it's more of a upright seating position. Some have sportier engines. Some have more of a modern classic look to them. But it's more of an upright seated position, traditional motorcycle is this category. Lance, what are you excited about?
Well, I have to say it's the Triumph Speed 400 and the Scrambler 400X. And I also have to say that I don't think any two individuals on the face of the earth probably have had more intimate involvement with those two bikes than you two. So I think you should tell us about it.
That is fair. Lance is referencing the CTXP adventure where Spurge and I rode to the highest motorable pass, the highest road in the world in India. And we spent, what was it, Spurge? Almost 2,000 miles, I think, in the saddle of those bikes.
Over
1,700
miles? Oh, it was over 1,700, just shy of 1,800,
yeah. Spurge mostly riding the Speed 400 and I mostly riding the Scrambler 400X. But bottom line, this is a new platform from Triumph. It's a single cylinder platform that Triumph in the past few years, really the most affordable motorcycle that Triumph offered. The sort of gateway machine was either a Bonneville or most recently the Trident 660, I believe, the 3-cylinder Trident 660, which is an $8,000 bike, $8,000 or $9,000 bike, something like that. So now these bikes will come in to the United States in 2024 at around $5,000, 5,500, I think. Is that right, Spurge?
49 something, just under 5 for the Speed, and then the Scrambler is a little bit more than that.
Right. And yeah, so I think this is like I was just saying, it's exciting when there's a new platform, right? It's exciting when it's not sort of like, oh, they took that engine and they're doing something else with it, which is interesting. But this is just a motorcycle cut from whole cloth that Triumph has built out and is going to sell. And Spurge and I don't know. I think overall our take was good, right? On those bikes, like they seem like my feeling. I still have yet to ride one as of the recording of this video on an American highway. I think they might feel a little strained at 80 miles an hour if that's where if that's how you want to ride. But in general, they felt solid, fun. They're handsome, and then worked pretty well.
I liked them much more than I thought I was going to. Not that I didn't think I was going to like it, but you just never know what you're going to get, right? Yeah. And I would say my biggest takeaways were that the fit and finish is exactly as you would expect with a more expensive Triumph. I thought they did a really good job of, the attention to detail. Yeah. And the other thing was, when Zach and I were making that episode, part of the picking of the bikes, was a story that we wanted to tell. And I think the story for myself was I had suggested, I have spent so much time on a Bonneville. I've had so many different adventures with the Speed Twin, which was originally the Street Twin. And so for me, the Speed 400 was very appropriate for me to pick that bike.
Absolutely.
And secretly, I was a little bit jealous of Zach because some of the roads that we were going over were more off-road than they were road. And some of the terrain that we were going to tackle was a little bit more appropriate for a Scrambler style bike. But at the end of the day, I actually was really pleased with my pick. And even in some of the more deep sand, washy type stuff that we got ourselves into, I thought the Speed handled itself really well. And I think for anyone out there looking for either an entry-level motorcycle with some more classic style to it, or for someone out there looking at adding a second bike to their garage and you just want something a little bit more around town friendly with, great gas mileage, I think the Speed 400 is going to be a hard bike to beat in the fact that it looks a little bit different than the other 400s that we see in the market currently.
Yeah. It really seems like a good stab. And of course, let's be fair here. You rode ostensibly a street bike up into the mountains and across rivers and stuff like that. But you are Spurgeon Dunbar after all. Spurgeon Dunbar, crusher of adventure rides. So, not every person, not every rider is going to have that same experience. I just like to throw that out there. But I do think that it's an interesting place to strike the market for Triumph. I don't think there's a lot that really competes with those. But, Royal Enfield has some stuff that I think is charming and classically styled, but probably not quite as advanced or as I don't know, as punchy or as sophisticated, really. And yeah, aside from that, what else is there? Like, what else? You can get a Kawasaki Z400 for around $5,000, right? That's a little parallel twin sport bike from Kawasaki, and it's a terrific motorcycle. But someone like
it looks like a Transformer. It doesn't look like
absolutely. That's
what's
exactly
someone that
right.
wants a Bonneville.
Yep. Yeah. And someone, especially I always go back to my dad, who every time I suggest a new bike to him, he's like, "It looks like an alien is invading Earth," and he wants a round headlight, and he wants he likes the classic style, and there are plenty of people that are younger than he is that feel the same way. And I think that the Speed genuinely offers some like a little bit of true kind of small sport bike feel and capability, but with a not even just a round headlight. Like a Honda CB300R has a round headlight. It's sort of like what Honda calls the Neo Classic thing, right? Where it has a round headlight and it has maybe round blinkers or like a round dash or something like that, and it has some sprinkles of retro styling, but it's not really a classically styled bike. The aesthetic is not vintage, whereas the Speed has that. So it's a cool blend for sure.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this in the comment section on Common Tread the other day. The shootout that I think some of our readers and even myself are most excited about would be to put a Scrambler 400X up against the new Himalayan and see, of those two bikes, which one comes out as the top dog. Because I think it's very clear, especially during our time in India, that there's no secret that the Scrambler 400X, especially in the Indian market, is definitely going after the Royal Enfield.
Right, which is hugely popular. And of course, they're both built in India. In the case of the Triumph, these Triumph 400s are built in India, which is an interesting step. Triumph is not even close to the first European brand to take that step, but interesting.
I look forward. It's a great way to start off the segment, Lance, and I look forward to you getting to try those bikes because,
indeed,
I think that you are someone that you have a long history with small displacement motorcycles. You don't own a car. You've got different motorcycles that you travel around with, and I know that you've talked extensively as of late that getting something smaller in displacement to just use as an around towner, so you don't have to hop on the VFR every time you want to run to the bank. I think one of those two motorcycles could easily be something that would be appealing to you.
Yeah. Speaking of classically styled motorcycles, I want to talk about the BMW R9. Wait, no. Is it the R12 9T? Lance, correct me. You're always so good at this. R12 9T.
9T.
Right. Not to be confused with the R9T, which is a sort of like steampunk quasi-retro bike that BMW's been producing for something like 10 years now. This is an update, still using the old, still using the previous generation, now 2 or 3 generations old, oil-cooled Boxer twin. Is that correct, Lance? But the aesthetics and the sort of like, I don't know, demeanor has been updated a little bit. I think there's 2 models.
Yeah,
now.
there's the R12, which is got some cruiser-ish kind of styling to it, and the R12 9T, which is what BMW calls the Roadster class. Right. So yeah, I don't quite get it, but whatever.
How is it? How is this different? How is it different than the R9T?
There's some styling updates. Like it doesn't have that asymmetrical snorkel thing anymore, right? What else was there, Lance?
There's. I honestly can't remember. They did some tweaks to it, but I mean, they already had in the past. They had several versions of that R9T platform, and so now
true.
this is just the latest update to that.
But I guess that's my question, because we just talked about the fact that we're throwing a lot of weird numbers and names out at people. So this is just them throwing the 12 into the R9T name and then updating the R9T.
Updating that, and
right.
The only thing about it that is, I guess, really new is the R12 with its sort of cruiser type of styling, whereas before you had, for example, there was the original R9T, and then they did Spurgeon. I think you rode the R9T Scrambler, and they had the Urban GS, which was sort of an homage back to the original GS, and so they had all these variations. But the cruiser aspect is the new variation, and I don't understand why BMW keeps trying to build cruisers. They keep doing it, and it never works. And
that's fair. I will say, this is a more classic. This is a more typical attempt at a cruiser for a European or Japanese company, right? Like BMW has taken this R9T Roadster, which we're all familiar with, as we point out, right? They came out with the R9. I don't remember when the R9T came out, but the R9T Roadster came out, which is sort of and it ended up being a success. And then BMW ended up building, a bunch of different spinoffs of it. And now the spinoff is this cruiser thing, but it's not the same thing as BMW building that R18 cruiser, which was very much a Harley Davidson Softail, but done by BMW. And it was really like BMW went all in there. And as far as from where I'm sitting, it didn't quite work. Whereas this is very much a platform that exists within BMW's lineup that has been successful. And BMW has now said, okay, now there's one that has less, it has less rear suspension, so it's lower. It has slightly different styling, so it looks a little more cruisery, but it's not, I don't think it's like a hard swing at cruiserdom. No. It's just sort of like, if this is what you want, then you can have this other thing. It has a lower seat height. It has, well, hang on, another quick sidebar here. It has less horsepower. Why do they do that? What's it's the same engine, right? It's the same platform. It's the same, the bikes share all this DNA, but the cruiser doesn't have as much horsepower.
I didn't know that. The thing that I was going to say was that in the past, looking at the differences in the R9T line, there's definitely been downgraded components.
Yes. Yeah.
And it looks like the cruiser has an upside down fork, where previously the other R9T platforms have a traditional fork. So maybe they're all going to get nicer components as they upgrade the entire line.
Yeah, maybe that's a fair call out in general, is that in my opinion, the original R9T, or the sort of like premium R9T Roadster, not the 9T Pure, not the 9T Racer, not the Urban GS, not the, is that all of them? Scrambler. The original premium Roadster was really the pick of the litter. It was more expensive, but had much nicer suspension and better brakes and that kind of thing. So maybe there's an upgrade across the line, but I'm guessing they're going to kind of build down to the customer that ultimately was interested in that bike, which was, I think BMW was proud to tell us all on a couple of occasions that a lot of people that were buying R9Ts were not motorcyclists prior. They were like, they were sort of like conquest customers, not from other brands.
Yeah, I think it's their version of a Bonneville. It's their version of a Ducati Monster, or a Scrambler. Like, when you look at those traditional looking motorcycles, they've been huge gateway drugs for a lot of OEMs, and there's a reason that a lot of people are doing it.
But like a good gateway drug, we're agreed.
Yeah, like crack,
not like the bad kind.
Not like exactly. Yeah.
So any other?
I'm just kidding, kids.
Bikes?
Don't do drugs. Crack cocaine is not a joke. Lance, Zach, I'm ashamed of both of you, because neither one of you mentioned a bike that, frankly, I really, really super duper hope that we see in 2024. A bike that we've seen pictures of, a bike that neither one of you put on our pre-production list. What bike is it that you think that I'm talking about?
Give us another hint. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yamaha.
The GP thing, the like
XSR 900 GP.
We're not worthy, apparently. Yamaha, only Europeans get that.
Yeah. I am getting really tired of this bullshit Yamaha where you're creating these kind of cool motorcycles and you're not bringing them across the Atlantic for us. And that bothers me. But I out of all the bikes that we saw in the sport/standard segment this year, and Lance and Zach both know that I have got a soft spot in my heart for a Honda Superhawk of yesteryear. Zach makes fun of me for it. Lance almost bought one, so he's a little bit more on my side. But when I'm looking at a Yamaha XSR 900 GP, it reminds me of what I liked about the Superhawk. A little half fairing, kind of a cool little GP canopy, just oozes style. It's got the 900 triple in it, so it's quirky and weird and torquey. That is a bike that I would ride. That's the bike that I would add to my garage, and I really want Yamaha to bring it to America.
All right, you heard it here first, Yamaha. If you import that goofy Extreme T7 and the XSR 900 GP, you have one buyer for each of those
Guaranteed.
bikes.
Guaranteed.
Spurgeon,
I don't know.
exactly. Spurgeon's good for it.
Lance said he was going to buy a Kawasaki ZX4RR last year and completely does not remember that. So I can't. We're not holding anybody anything on this podcast.
Okay,
but Lance,
enough.
you're shaking your head over there. Do you disagree with this bike? You don't think this bike looks cool?
No, not at all. I think the bike looks great. Looks interesting. The sad fact is, Spurgeon, Yamaha has deemed you unworthy. We don't
Because
get
of the
it.
passport that you hold. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're not allowed to have them. We can't have nice things here.
Well, for those of you that have no idea what we're talking about, Yamaha revamped the XSR 900 into a platform which looks kind of like, a vintage GP bike. It's got a lot of cool aesthetic to it.
Go over to Common Tread and see my article where I gave cursory attention to the update to the MT-09 and then mainly whined about why we weren't getting the XSR 900 GP instead. So
yeah, it is a cool looking bike, and it's cool that Yamaha would even take that swing at all.
Well,
maybe it'll be like the Transalp, and
we'll get it
it'll
next
show
year.
up next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. If we just have to be patient.
Yeah,
I thought it was Dustin Whelan that wrote the article, or maybe he didn't write the article yet, and maybe I'm just remembering a Common Tread conversation that we had. But he was one of the ones that had talked about something like the retro styling and really what's the next trend that we're going to see in motorcycling,
Right.
and getting into some of this like 80s, 90s kind of a style aesthetic with motorcycles. And if the XSR 900 GP is any kind of an indication of where some of these standard / sport bike styles are going to go, I am maybe showing my age a little bit here, but I'm a huge fan of that trend.
I agree. Why not? Suzuki dabbled with the Katana, sort of like reaching back into yesteryear, and Yamaha's done it. And there's lots of did you guys see the Kawasaki press release about is it like 30th anniversary or 40th anniversary of the Ninja or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
And
yeah.
they have they have those
colors,
anniversary editions. Yeah, they're sort of like the white and blue and green.
Yeah, from the ZX7, the old ZX7
Right.
colors. Yeah,
Brilliant. I know Honda did that with their little dirt bikes. Also, they made like a pink CRF50 and CRF70 and 110 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
that's
Anyway.
the article. That's the article that Dustin's working on. That Spurgeon's remembering the discussion about. That as of this podcast recording, is not out yet, but it'll be out by the time the podcast is up.
Perfect. Then you can go over to the comment thread. You can read all those excellent words that Dustin put together because of something that someone suggested.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, there's some ripe fruit to be picked from vintage aesthetics, and that's what's cool. You can go 50s and 60s style, like a sort of a Triumph did with the Speed 400 or something like that, or you can go with this 80s thing, like the early 90s GP thing, like Yamaha did with that XSR 900 GP. So I agree, Spurgeon. Why not? Why not kind of like pick at some of that stuff? Plenty of fun stuff.
The insight there too is that we have a lot of motorcycle conversations, whether it's pre-proing for Highside, Lowside, or it's in Common Tread meetings. So sometimes it's hard to keep it all straight.
It is.
And then there's a lot of articles that we read every single day. So that being said, are there any additional standard motorcycles that we're missing, or should we plan on moving on?
The only ones I can think of are kind of like revamp kind of thing, like the Indian FTR. Got some sort of revamp thing,
the
right?
carbon fiber thing that they're coming out with.
Carbon one, but there was a carbon one before. I don't really understand why this one's new.
This one was just. This is the one where it's a partnership with 100%.
Okay, gotcha.
So my whole thing on that is, you know how you tell a really good rider from us ordinary riders.
Put on a pair of 100% goggles.
No. The really good riders get someone pays them to have their logos on the bike. The rest of us, we have to pay to get the logo on the bike.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're saying that 100% needs to pay to get the logo on the bike, or that 100%?
No, I'm saying
good?
that if you buy the 100% version of the FTR, it costs more. So you're paying up to get the logo on the bike. Whereas if you're
right.
If you're on the MotoGP grid, people pay a lot of money to get their logos on your bike.
True. Right. Well, yeah, someone's got to serve that tour, and I guess it's us plebes. But yeah, I can't think of.
No, I
can't think of any other like standout ones. That is that Honda Hornet that's still not coming to the States, right?
Once
We
again,
we should do an entire episode of the podcast about motorcycles that we're not getting in the United
we are
States.
not
Yeah, we
worthy
know-
yet.
Yeah, we know that you're primed and ready to go there, Spurge. And all your Yamahas that you can't get. Anyway,
Lance Oliver, before we move on,
Okay, right.
standard motorcycle in your garage, if you could add one, which one would you add?
grumble.
I mean, I really do think both those Triumph 400s are really interesting. That's why I mentioned it. I think they both are really appealing.
I know
I'm
that
not
you,
sure which
you
way
had
I
mentioned
go.
to me. Well, I know you mentioned to me in private that you were excited about the Scrambler 400 as a possible little dual sport for those dirt roads up there.
Yeah.
Zach?
I am concerned that this revamp of the R9T will be will not be good. I mean, I think it's going to be a perfectly engaging and characterful and a capable bike to bop around on. I worry that it will lose some of the pizzazz and some of the sort of elegance and balance that original 9T Roadster had, and that would make me sad. But this is speculation. I don't know if that's true. And reason I bring it up is that's the bike I would take. I've always liked the 9T, and I hope that I'll like the new one also.
Fair enough.
That's what I'd go with. Yeah.
Well, obviously, my pick is going to be the XSR 900 GP if Yamaha brings it into America. I will say, if they don't, my pick from last year, I know it's not new for 24, but I think as I'm thinking about standard, and this kind of splits the line between standard and sport. It's definitely
You just want to put bikes in your garage. You just want
to I do. That's why I'm playing this game with you knuckleheads in the hopes that one of the manufacturers listens and gives me one too.
Right. If you just tell Triumph you want a Street Triple RS in your
long enough.
If you just keep saying it, eventually it'll happen. Manifest destiny.
The power of positive thinking.
The XSR 900 GP is my pick. But again, if I had to fall on a backup, I would not be remiss to go back to my same pick from last year. And with that being said, speaking of things that we talked a lot about last year, looking forward into 2023, electric and alternative fueled vehicles was a pretty hot topic. And I'm curious to you gentlemen, what innovations, if any, have we seen happen over the past 12 months heading into 2024 that we're actually excited about?
Guest honors, Lance.
Well, I mean, I think obviously the news is the Kawasaki hybrid, since it's the first of its kind. Personally, I don't, it's not really what most interests me, but I think it's significant in the sense that one of the major motorcycle manufacturers is now creating a hybrid.
76 miles per gallon claimed, a parallel twin platform with a hybrid electric motor that Jen Dunstan actually got to ride. And the video that she created showed a hybrid Kawasaki off the line with a ZX-10, and the hybrid pretty much smoked it, off the line.
Right. First 25 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think we should. The point, don't read into that too much. This bike's not going to tear your arms off with power. Right. What it is as Lance said, a very interesting combination of electric and gas, which of course in the automotive world is extremely popular, prevalent these days. And it for some reason took a long time for motorcycles to come around to this sort of like a hybrid system that really kind of mimics the practicality of using both powertrains. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's so interesting. I think it's pretty weird to look at. Again, some polarizing looks. I think it's got this really odd long wheelbase. And I don't know if the styling really does it for me, but I'm totally fascinated by it. I can't wait to try it. And I think that you'd have to have a heart of stone not to be intrigued at the concept of a bike that you could sort of like zip around town with electric power and then buzz up into the mountains and burn your gasoline like always. But Lance is scoffing at me. You have a heart of stone?
Why are you scoffing, Lance?
Yeah,
why are you're
not.
I mean, I do believe you have a heart of stone, but that has nothing to do with this conversation.
Well, okay.
What is it, Lance?
So Zach says you have to have a heart of stone. In her review, Jen actually said that you would have to be cynical to call a hybrid the worst of both worlds. I guess I'm cynical with a heart of stone because while I do think this is a significant, important, newsworthy, noteworthy model, I do kind of feel like it's the worst of both worlds. So you've got a hybrid drivetrain, which means that you've got double the complexity in a sense, and you have to have this fancy transmission system to make the two work together. You're still producing all your power with gasoline. I mean, you just get to use an electric motor part of the time, but then you've got to burn gasoline to run a generator to power up the battery to use the electric. I mean, it's like, give me an electric bike that I can plug in, ride around, never go to a gas station again, not emit, produce any emissions, or give me a gas powered motorcycle that I can ride anywhere I want and refuel in 2 minutes. Right. Well, give me one or the other, but don't give me both tied up together.
I disagree with you. I think this is the bike. No. I think this is the bike that the motorcycling community needs to get them across the threshold. I don't think making the jump from the internal combustion engine to, hey, you never have to go to a gas station again, is what the average motorcyclist is looking for. And I know that you've talked about how you're so intrigued and you're so excited about electric vehicles, and you'd love to have an electric motorcycle. I've yet to see you put money down on one, and you're somebody that's actually excited about electric motorcycles and would ride one, but you're not buying one. And I think that's where the hybrid has the potential to split the difference and maybe appeal a little bit more to the traditionalists of the motorcycling world and bring them over into something that maybe helps them, get accustomed to EV. Sorry, Zach, I think I cut you off.
No, I'm happy that you chimed in. I think that Lance's point is a good one. I think that you could make an argument that in motorcycling, because motorcycles are, the MSRPs on average are lower than cars, that if someone wants the capability of this bike, that they would just buy two bikes, that they would just have two, right? That you'd buy a $13,000 Zero FXE with 40 miles of range, and you'd use that to ride around town. Great bike, punchy, capable, good brakes, handles nice, cool to look at, awesome, done deal. And then you spend another $10,000 or $15,000 on a gas bike, or spend less on each and try to squeeze two MSRPs out of one, and like you have two bikes instead of having one, because that's what every motorcyclist wants anyway. I think that's a fair argument to make, but I don't agree with you with the whole like you're only burning gasoline. Like, you're going to burn that gasoline anyway. Why not charge up a battery, and then when you run down to the store, you don't even start the engine? I don't know. It seems I think to your initial point of buying two motorcycles, like you without knowing it hit on the biggest problem with electric only motorcycles. You're going to spend $13,000 on a motorcycle with 40 to 50 miles of range. And the average motorcyclist is not going to be okay with that, because whether or not they're taking long, crazy road trips in real life, in their mind, every motorcyclist wants to be able to hop on that motorcycle and hit the open road. And I think you're asking a lot of any consumer to say, I'm going to spend $13,000 on something and be able to go 40 miles before I have to pull over and charge it up. And I think that's the solution. I'm not asking people to do that. Lance is asking people to do that. I'm not asking.
I'm not mad at you, Zach. You and I are always going to be okay. Lance and I, on the other hand, oh my God, the fights that we will have.
Well, I think it's your cynicism is good though, Lance, because this is what I'm sure you're echoing the feelings of many a Highside, Lowside listener.
I'm just going to stay quiet because I feel like I'm about one step away from the villagers gathering around throwing rocks at me, because I've been called a cynic. I've been called a heart of stone. I've been called a hypocrite by Spurgeon.
I would never call you a hypocrite.
So just
you're nothing if not uniform in your convictions. No, and we all know that the audience members much prefer you to me anyway, so they're all going to take your side. So if anybody's gathering with pitchforks, they're coming after me. What about swappable battery technology, right? Like, I know that we talked about that last year, but this year we did see some small displacement motorcycles talking about swappable battery technology. There was a lot of backlash around like the actual performance of those motorcycles. But what are the thoughts on the swappable battery technology that we've started to see come stateside?
Well, we have to be careful with our terminology. Are you talking about swappable batteries in the sense of going to a kiosk, taking your old battery out and putting a new one in and getting a fresh one that's charged? Or are you talking about the new Kawasaki ZE01 that we saw recently unveiled, where it's removable batteries, but you just take them out and carry them into your apartment with you and charge them inside? Because they're two different things.
This is another fight that Lance and I have had in the past.
It's two different things, Spurgeon.
I think they're the same thing.
No,
Lance.
they're not the same.
They just
functionally they're not the same.
If you can take the battery out of the bike into your house and charge it, then in theory, 6 months or 6 years down the road, you can pull up to a battery exchange station, take the batteries out of your motorcycle. Why? Why could you not do that?
Because the batteries, okay, the ZE1 that we just saw, that battery, there is no place in the world you can go to a kiosk, unplug a fully charged battery, put yours in that slot, and go away in 2 minutes. They're just
not yet, you could do that if the kiosk had that ability. You could take the batteries out of the Kawasaki and swap them.
You're saying the bike is capable of it. It just needs the infrastructure in society, whereas Lance
but
is
that's
saying
not the point. The point
society is...
The point of the design with the Kawasaki is for you, if you live in the city and you have to park on the street or whatever, or you park in a shared parking garage or something like that, you can pull the battery out easily, carry it upstairs to your apartment, plug it in the wall, and the next day you take it back down and you go to work again. That's not the same as pulling into the electric version of a gas station and swapping a battery. That's a swappable battery.
Okay. You're talking about intention. Viagra was intended to be a heart medication to help with people that had blood clots or something like that. And what do we use it for today, Lance?
I don't know what you use it for, Spurgeon, but I don't use it at all.
My point is that yes, I get that's the claimed marketing. This is what Kawasaki created this for, because the infrastructure doesn't exist yet. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? You have a bike where you can take the batteries out and you can swap them. So the next step, in theory, could be that you have some entrepreneur that opens up a little roadside stand in New York City, a metropolitan area, and says, hey, if you have a Kawasaki, swappable e-bike, swing by and I'll swap your batteries out for you.
Yeah, but the difference is that this already exists in other places in the world where you do have true swappable batteries, where you can pull up and in a minute or two, you can take a battery out of your bike and you can put it in the charger thing, and you can take a fresh charged one, you put it in, and you're on your way. It's just like putting gas in your bike. That exists in different parts of the world right now, but the new Kawasaki that we're seeing coming to our market, that is not the same thing. You still have to wait for the battery to charge. You don't just swap the battery. You still have to wait for it to charge.
I hate to stir the pot here, but can you buy a second battery and then have a second battery in your house?
Well, it has two batteries. I guess you could buy probably more batteries, but then you still have to make every stop at your house, not wherever you're going to. You don't have to stop at your house to put gas in your bike.
That's true.
So it's not the same thing.
I would venture to say at this point that this might be a whole nother podcast talking about
it's already gone on too long.
We should talk about other electric / alternative fuel motorcycles that exist. I think the Ninja 7 Hybrid I have other questions I want to ask you, Lance. And yeah, you brought up those Kawasaki electrics, which are also new bikes that we saw, along with BMW talking about that that CEO2 scooter, which is sort of like a smaller, theoretically more accessible version of the CEO4 that I did a daily rider on. I think to Spurgeon's original point here, there is some movement, regardless of how you define swappable batteries. I want to get back into that, or how cynical or cold your heart is about hybrid bikes. There are more and more electric thingies, systems, and motorcycles coming our way. So are there any other ones that caught your eye, Lance or Spurge?
How about the one that we used in a CTXP episode at the beginning of the year? and we are now all behind the scenes questioning whether or not this bike is ever going to exist. And of course, I'm talking about the Sondor's Metacycle.
Yes. Well,
Lance, what are your thoughts on the Sondor's Metacycle? Because I am sure that you have some.
Well, yeah.
Give us the gossip. Give us the gossip,
It's
Lance.
just one of several disappointments, as I wrote about in my my annual predictions for the coming year in the article on Common Tread. Sondor's promised so much and delivered so little, and now basically it's just a question of watching the people who put down deposits and purchase prices argue over whether they should file a class action lawsuit or file a complaint with the Attorney General's office because they're being ghosted by the company, and it's so many others. I mean, I think we are seeing a real slow point in the whole electric motorcycle industry. If you saw, for example, in the same article, there was reference to the fact that Livewire, the spinoff from Harley Davidson, sold a grand total of 50 motorcycles in the third quarter of last year. I mean, that's barely more than one every 2 days. Now, shortly after,
that worldwide or is that
yes,
in the country?
worldwide, 50 motorcycles in a quarter, down from 200 and some the year before. Shortly after this podcast comes out, we'll get numbers for the fourth quarter, and we'll see if the introduction of the Del Mar, which is started shipping, will materially change that. But we have seen, companies like Lightning struggle to produce a handful of motorcycles. We've seen Damon continue to say to not be able to deliver actual production of motorcycles. We just see disappointment after disappointment. And my feeling, perhaps best exemplified by Livewire, is that what has happened is we had this real excitement. Early adopters rushed out and bought these bikes. And now we've burned through the pool of people who are excited about them, willing to be early adopters, and actually have the money to buy one. And we're suddenly out of buyers. And we're seeing
the market's saturated. The people that have one, and then
everybody who wants one has one, except for the few people who want one but can't afford one. And so now we're in this dead period, and it's because of all the challenges that electric motorcycles face. You just can't load them up with a couple $1,000 worth of batteries like you can a car and make something that's rideable. And it's also the competition from electric bicycles and all these other things that have other use cases that are more affordable and they're more useful to people. So I feel it's a real kind of difficult moment for the industry.
Let me ask you a question, Lance. So arguably, you do want one, and arguably you could potentially afford one. What is stopping you from going out tomorrow and buying an electric motorcycle?
Well, I don't. So I would have loved to have had an electric motorcycle when I had a traditional commute. Back in the days when I worked in an office job 9 to 5, but now I'm a 100% remote worker. I don't have a commute. I mean, back then, if I had an electric motorcycle that I could ride to work, there was parking where I could plug it in. My employer would pay to recharge it for me. Man, that would have been ideal. My personal use case right now doesn't really fit that. That's what electric motorcycles are really good for. They're good for a repetitive, short trip commuting. They're not good for traveling. They're too much of a challenge. Sure, there's a few hardcore fans out there that'll do anything it takes to travel cross country on a Livewire 1. We've seen it done. It's been done, but it's just too hard. So the problem is the people who are in that category of having that, that use case, they can also go buy an electric bicycle, or they can buy something else. And so there's just too small a group of people for whom it makes good practical sense. And I'm not quite in that group.
That's fair. It's fair.
Yeah.
Zach, I don't know if there's anything you want to add for the electric segment, as far as jumping in here. But I do know that we're getting close to time. We still want to talk about cruisers, although there's not a lot that we saw new being introduced for the cruiser segment so far. But is there any wrapped up final thoughts on electric before we move on from there? Because I think Lance's point is a good one to kind of end on. But I also want to give you an opportunity if there's any final thoughts on your part.
No, I could keep chewing this over for a while. I think it's why we come back to electric motorcycles on Highside, Lowside, once a season or once every 2 seasons to have an episode to talk about the state of the union and what's going on, because all these conversations are worthwhile and continually interesting because there's so much. There's always action. Even Lance says, I think Lance is right when he says that it's a little bit of a doldrum right now, like a little bit of a lull. But even in this lull where there's companies that are seemingly kind of like folding or floundering, there are new products. They're Kawasaki coming out with products and BMW coming out with products and Honda coming out with a weird little suitcase with wheels that you can sit on, which is not even worth getting excited about from a motorcyclist standpoint. But the point is,
you're not excited about the Moto Compacto?
I mean, I think it's very cute.
Lance, you're shaking your head. No, you're not excited about the Moto Compacto?
No, the Moto Compacto is built to justify putting out a press release. It's you can't. No one has ever told me one place you could actually ride one.
I love how cynical Lance is. This is an important piece of talking about new bikes, Lance, is having you around being like, what are they even thinking building that thing? Yeah. The engine's too big. The engine's too small. I don't care about electrics. The wheels are too small. When are you going to ride that? I don't even know the person. Like, I love, this is great. We need you here every episode to tear down all these stupid ideas that we think are either good or cute or interesting or something like that. I think it's brilliant.
Could you imagine bringing Lance into CTXP planning meetings? Oh my God. Right.
Yeah, we're gonna go road racing on a scooter, and Lance he'd probably just either fall asleep or get up and leave the room.
That's the one. I think that's the one he'd be the most excited about is the road racing and scooter episode.
I'm excited for all of them as long as I don't have to do it. If I can watch
there we go. Okay.
you and Ari do it, that's great.
Well, to get back to what I was going to say, I think that, I am a middle-aged man living in a large metropolitan area, and I have enough money theoretically to purchase an electric motorcycle. And the sweet spot is the middle of the road there. That's sort of like, the middle price range of motorcycles. You can get a cheap motorcycle is $5,000, an expensive motorcycle is $20,000 or $25,000. And in the middle there's a lot of action. And among them is a Zero that gets 40 or 50 miles of range for $12,000 or $13,000. And that is a lot of money to pay to not be able to go very far. But I can't help but be intrigued by it. It's neat. And like I rode a Zero DSR-X, which is this sort of quote unquote adventure electric motorcycle, which is sort of an absurd oxymoron to begin with. But 100 miles of range, incredible power, torque, power wheelies, awesome bike to ride, great brakes, great power, comfortable. It's still a city bike, and it's $25,000, which is like little hard to swallow, I think. And then, there's all this sort of like entry level stuff, like the Sondor's Metacycle, which was at one point a $5,000 bike that would go 80 miles an hour and had more range, but of course it doesn't deliver those things, and the company can't deliver them literally, and now it's sort of falling apart. So it is easy to be cynical and to be a little bit deflated talking about the prospects of electric motorcycles. But the fact that there are some beacons in every category for what could be done, I think is intriguing. I know now, Spurge, you're going to say, which one do I want in my garage? I can't wait for Lance to answer this question. He's hated every motorcycle we've talked about in this whole category.
Well, Zach, why don't you go first? Which one would you put in?
If I was going to have an electric bike, if someone's just going to give me an electric bike, I'd get that Zero DSR-X. It's tall and it's heavy and it's expensive, but it is totally wicked. I mean, it's really fun to ride, and it's got lockable waterproof storage like a scooter, but it looks like a motorcycle, and it's fast, and it works well, and I like it. comfortable.
Lance, what about you?
I mean, I could totally go with something like a Zero FX, because if we go back to the beginning where we were talking about adventure bikes and you asked me what I'd buy, and I said I'd buy some friendly little 250 dual sport. The Zero FX would do exactly the same thing for me, except for limiting me to maybe doing the longer ride.
Yeah, I think that, if anybody was going to do a long-term review of a Zero, I would love to put one in your hands just to allow you to have that access to an electric motorcycle.
I agree.
For me, obviously, it's the Moto Compacto. I'm going
right,
Honda Moto
obviously.
Compacto.
No. Yeah. Spurgeon riding a Moto Compacto is a photograph we should get.
We need
and
that.
Actually,
yes.
Come to think of it, I picked a bike that, and so did you, Lance, a bike that wasn't even on the list of new for 2024. It's just a random electric motorcycle. I'd get a Kawasaki hybrid, despite Lance telling me that it's worthless. I'm too excited. I haven't ridden it yet, so maybe if I ride it, I won't feel that way. But I'm excited about it. I want to try it, and that's the one I'd pick. So.
Yeah, I think especially in a situation where you are a commuter going back and forth to the office, but you're also someone that might, go outside of the normal range limits. Being able to hit mid 70s in the MPG range, I think is super impressive. And again, I think that the hybrid is onto something. I think that's the one that's going to be the combination to watch, despite what Lance says. So we have our producer Chase, who's holding up a big red sign talking about how long this episode is running. So for those of you listening, you're welcome, because we came back with season 8 with a vengeance, and gave you
all these pent up words in our brain. We had to say them.
My God. And we're not even done yet. We've got to play the engine sound guessing game with our guest Lance, but very quickly, just so we don't completely alienate the cruiser segment, there wasn't much announced so far that we could potentially see in 2024 around cruisers. Lance, guest honors, is there anything in the cruiser segment that is new, that is groundbreaking, that we're excited for?
I guess the only thing is really the Kawasaki Eliminator, right, Zach? I mean, isn't that really
that's the big one for me, which is that Kawasaki 450 parallel twin that we talked about earlier, or we suggested existed, and it has made its debut in the US market anyway, in the Kawasaki Eliminator, which is a sort of a cruiser, kind of a naked, but it's not really a naked bike. It's kind of low at the back, but it's sort of like a tall cruiser that's sort of sporty. That's kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit hard to pin down exactly what that bike is. And I said this in my Daily Rider year-end review video and article. The Kawasaki Eliminator, to me, is the answer to a question that no one asked. I just don't. Who was asking for a bike that's shaped like that looks like that has that size engine? I just don't know why Kawasaki built it. And when I rode it, I thought, this thing is great. It's great. It's a friendly, happy, easy bike to ride. It's just sporty enough that, like, it leans over enough and has enough pep in the engine that it's fun and engaging and like keeps my interest. But it's sort of low and approachable and kind of like, it's like shoulders are slouched just enough to make it cool, I think. I think it's a fantastic little bike. But at the same time, such a head scratcher. I don't really get why, but I like it.
I mean, the platform speaks for itself. That little parallel twin engine is such a charming engine.
Yeah, it is. It's good.
I think, Zach did a Daily Rider around the Honda Shadow. I think the Honda Shadow is a line that we sometimes forget, but it's got a huge history.
Huge.
When you look back at the last 35 plus years,
40
years, 40.
Yeah. 2023, the Honda Shadow turned 40. So it's been 4 decades, and that's a run that not a lot of bikes get, right? You're talking Harley Sportsters, you're talking BMW GSs, you're talking Honda Goldwing. Like, those are they're heavy hitters in the category of motorcycles that have been made for 40 years straight. And so the Shadow, I rode that Shadow Phantom around, and it is not the most interesting motorcycle I've ever ridden, but it is it does the thing. And it does have quite an interesting history. So good call out, I think.
Yep. We also know Royal Enfield introduced the Super Meteor 650 in 23, and we know that there is a shotgun variation, or a new shotgun cruiser that is built, right, I believe, on the same engine platform as that is potentially coming.
Yes.
And we also know that at the time this is being released, we will have spent some time on a new Harley Davidson model.
That's right.
At the time of recording this, we do not know what it's going to be, but we do have confirmation that Harley has a new model coming out early in 24.
I believe, Mr. Lance Oliver, you are scheduled to attend that launch to represent RevZilla and Common Tread. Is that accurate?
That's the plan.
Okay.
Lance is going to attend that launch and then also ride the motorcycle out to visit you, Zachary.
I know, Lance in California. I can't wait to see it. Lance, I would like you to do me a favor if you can. You won't like this. I'm going to warn you. I'm like your dentist. Can you do me a favor? Give me what we know about the Harley Davidson that you're scheduled to ride, the 2020 new 2024 Harley Davidson model, is that it's a new model and it's from Harley Davidson, and that's all we know. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's all I know.
Okay. So what I'd like you to do right now is give us a quick review of the bike that you do not know anything about and you have not yet ridden. Since you're speaking in the future now, what did you think of that bike?
The bike I know nothing about and have not ridden?
That's correct. Yes. What's your prediction? What's your predictive review?
My prediction is it has a V-twin engine.
Nice. Okay. Was it torquey? Was it smooth? How did it feel? Talk us through it.
Probably had a little rumble to it, but you know.
Okay.
Is it a liquid cooled V-twin?
Probably not.
No, it probably is, right? Aren't they all liquid cooled now? Oh, no, I guess the partially, right? That's right.
Yeah.
Was it comfortable?
Probably.
Good. Okay. I've watched you twist in the wind enough.
For those of you listening, this is Lance's personal hell. First being on this podcast with Zach and I, and then having these imaginary questions lobbed at him. He's ready to get going.
Yeah, theoretical question.
I do have one thing I want to add that we skipped over, and I'll keep it super brief because I know we're way too long already. But one other model we didn't talk about that, and I hesitate to even bring it up because it's a perfect opportunity for me to look foolish because as we're recording it, we have no details, but by the time this comes out, the details will have been revealed. But it's the Triumph Daytona 660 that we're expecting to see come out soon. And for those of
you who are wondering how we know this, Lance has it's not like full on telepathy, but he has a connective force with his brain to the cosmos, and he can kind of tell. He can't predict the future, but he can sense it in a way. It's sort of like a Jedi thing.
Well, that plus try and put out a teaser and
come on, man! I'm trying to hype you up here. Work with me.
So it's going to be a sport bike on the presumably on the Trident platform, and
which is the small triple, the 660,
the small 660 3-cylinder. So it's really interesting because we've seen that sport bike class go away from the really hard edged super sports of the inline 4-cylinders, and now we've got the Suzuki GSX-8R and the Yamaha R7 and the Aprilia RS660, those bikes that are more reasonable, usable sport bikes. But the thing that Triumph brings to it is the triple cylinder engine. So that's going to be one to look forward to around the time this podcast comes out. So just
for those of you listening that might not know it, Lance was a long-time Daytona 675 owner.
Yeah.
We actually did a video a long time ago featuring Lance's Daytona 675 back when Lemmy was here. We did a Daytona 675 versus the new, I think it was Street Triple when the Street Triple came out.
Yeah, it was the Street Triple when it came out, the 765 version. So
yeah.
But this is going to be quite a different bike from that. So it's going to be interesting to see, but we'll see.
But I think if there's anybody to test it based on your history with the Daytona 675, I'm excited to put you in the cockpit, baby. Put a smile on your face.
Well, we should get a chance to ride it in March based on what Triumph has told us so far.
All right. Well, there's no shortage of things to look forward to in 2024. Obviously, we have talked way too long at this point, so I think we're going to skip any roundup questions. I think we've done enough of that, but we do want to play the engine sound guessing game, do we not, Zachary?
We do, and I would just like to formally say that if we forgot to address any bike in this podcast, it is absolutely the fault of Chase, who is cutting this. I mean, we have to stop talking. Sorry, we
Chase,
totally have other bikes in our
face
minds.
in the screen so people can see who you are.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So they can find your LinkedIn profile and leave, hate mail. Anyway, jokes aside, we should stop talking about these bikes. There's always more conversations to be had about the stuff that's coming down the pike, but we should move on, as you said, Spurge.
All right, so the engine sound guessing game. If this is your first time listening to Highside, Lowside, my God, I am sorry. What an episode for you to stumble onto. 2 hours long. Lance Oliver disagreeing with me getting mad at Lance. Lance is talking about using Viagra. Disgusting, Lance. Disgusting. This is a family-friendly episode, and look at you. This is why we can't bring you on that often.
Yeah, you said you were the least dirty of all of us, and then here we are. Unbelievable.
My God. But the point is you've made it through this far, listener, dear listener, and we are now going to reward you with what has become a sensation nationwide around the world, which is the engine sound guessing game. Zach, myself, Lance, none of us have any idea what engine sound our producer Chase has sourced for us today. We are all, you included, dear listener, going to listen to the engine sound together, and we're going to make our guesses. There will be 2 hints before we reveal the answer. The hints count for Zach and for Lance and myself as well. Again, we're playing the game with you at home, and unless there's any questions from Lance or Zach, I think we're ready to get a listen to the first engine sound of the season 8 season.
That's right.
Season twice. Yeah.
Shout it out if you know it. That counts for you listeners also sitting in your car or in your bedroom or whatever.
All right, let's play that sound. Well,
so you've heard the engine, Lance. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen and children how many cylinders it has?
2.
that's
Not super confident, but I agree.
I would have answered that exactly the same way, because at first I was like, maybe that's a single.
Yeah, I'm never confident, so
Yeah, I think it's a twin too.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other guesses here?
It's not a triple. It's not an inline 4. So it's definitely a twin or a single, leaning towards twin.
I think it's a 180 degree crank parallel twin, a la versus 650 versus 300.
Well, that would be in Lance's wheelhouse. I wouldn't put it past our producer Chase to throw something towards Lance that he was familiar with.
Yeah,
in hopes that he got it wrong, and then we were all going to laugh at him.
Yeah. That's right. You owned a Versus 650, right, Lance?
Yes, I did, for 90,000 miles.
Right.
And now my Uncle Bob has it
now.
So
belongs
he sold
to Spurgeon's Uncle Bob.
That's right. That's a commentary article about the ballad of Uncle Bob. Sure. Well, that only strengthens my feeling that it's a Versus 650.
It could be. Didn't exactly sound like my Versus 650.
So you're sounding like a spray paint can being rattled aggressively. Let's listen to it one more time for the audience, and then we'll give away the first hint. So let's play it one more time for you out there listening in the audience. All right.
If there are other theories, I think they should be welcome, because it's always more fun if there's diverse guesses.
I can throw a hint out if you want a hint, and then we can move on to a diverse guess if we want to. So
I don't need a hint. I know what bike it is.
You're going to stick with the Versus?
I am.
Okay.
I'm sticking
So
to my
you
guns.
heard it first. I didn't read the hint yet. Zach's sticking to his guns. Lance, did you want to say that you're less sure than Zach, more sure than Zach, or just as sure as Zach?
I'm less sure than Zach, as usual.
All right. The first hint is it is a 52-degree V-twin. Now, before Zach says anything, Lance, is a 52-degree V-twin the engine found in a Versys 650?
Definitely not.
So would that mean that Zach is right or horribly, horribly wrong?
It would mean he is incorrect, but it was a
I
worthy
think the
guess.
words you were looking for is horribly, horribly wrong.
Wow.
I was trying to come over
52-degree V.
that heart of stone reputation that I've gained.
Yeah,
and
you did it.
Be nicer, you know?
Is that a Goozy?
No.
Goozies are 90s.
Goozies are 90s.
Oh, they are 90s.
Is it 52?
Aprilia? That
If this,
What's Zach? What's the shadow?
The Shadow might be a 52. It was 45, and then it got bigger around 52.
so just for those of you listening,
It doesn't sound like a Shadow to me, though.
a 52-degree V-twin. The 52-degree it represents the degrees of angle between the cylinder heads.
The
not
display of the V-twin.
Yeah.
It's not the temperature.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
I apologize in advance to any owners of this motorcycle, but if that's a V-twin, it sounds like dump.
Wow.
Agreed? If I thought it was a Versys, and I'm not, I'm not God's gift to the engine guessing game.
For any of you out there who own whatever this motorcycle is, I can't believe Zach would say that about your beloved machine.
No.
It's delightful. Sounds charming.
A 52. Yeah, I think that's a Shadow V. I'm thinking like Aprilia SXV 550, but I think that was a wider V, and that was a higher performance.
That's what I was thinking of. The little that when I said Aprilia, I was thinking about the little V twin that they had for a while.
Yeah, but I don't think that was a 52. I think that was a 65-degree twin, same as the larger one, 60 or 65 is what I remember. But I could be wrong there. And
you're talking about the dual sporty one, right? That's
there was a Supermoto and there was a dirt bike. It was a little V twin. It was like a 450 and a 550 V twin. My roommate had one, and I remember it being a lot snappier. This sounds like a little bit more lumbering, but it doesn't sound as kind of like throaty or grumbly as a Honda Shadow to me. However, we talked about the Honda Shadow's rich history, and there have been many variants and engine sizes. So I certainly don't have that encyclopedia in my head.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's some variant of a Shadow. That's my
okay. All right, let's.
All right.
I've already been wrong, so I'm eliminated. You guys just continue on.
Hint number 2, not that Zach's not an encyclopedia, but according to Wikipedia, this bike was only available in the United States from 2010 to 2013. Does that help anybody? Because I again, aside from that Aprilia, which I know was only in the United States for a couple of years, I'm not sure what this would be.
What about those other like goofy, like the Aprilia Mana or something like that? I think that was earlier. Was that a parallel twin or was that a V twin? Anybody remember that? One had an automatic transmission.
I remember, but I don't remember the configuration.
I think that was a 750 V twin, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a Mana 800 or something like that. I think, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I don't know if it was. I don't remember if it was a V twin or a parallel twin or something like that. I remember it was.
I thought it was a V twin.
Well, I think I might be stumped. I don't know. I feel like I'm at a loss. I was so confident, and then I was way off, and now even with all these hints, I can't. I think I got nothing.
Was there anything in the Vulcan line that was?
That's a good guess. I was also thinking like Suzuki Boulevard or something like that, but I don't think those bikes were rare enough to only.
No, the Boulevard, they made that bike for years.
Yeah,
the small Boulevard was only a single anyway. You're talking about the big one.
Yeah, but we haven't heard a displacement. We don't know what size it is, do we?
No.
So it could be a 650 twin or something like that, right? Or a 700 twin. It could be 52 degrees.
Or it could be What's oh no, that wasn't 52. Yeah, I can't think of
All
anything
right.
that would be 52.
Final guesses. We're burning daylight here, people.
I've already embarrassed myself. I can't guess again. That's
Lance,
only
you
going
want
to
to
get
embarrass
worse.
yourself before I read the answer out loud?
I'm like I said, that's the best I've got. Some variant of a shadow.
It's a,
All right,
it's
well, I'm
a, it's
gonna-
a, it's a, hang on. It's a, what's that goofy CSC? Whatever. Never mind. Continue. Just tell me.
I'm gonna throw one final guess out.
Do it.
I'm
Since
gonna
you're looking
guess
at the answer.
a 2010 Honda NT700V, and I'm gonna flip the answer card over. Oh, look at that! A 2010 Honda NT700V. None of us got this even close. Also known as the Honda Duoval. Because the nickname was the Deauville, but people called it the Dullville.
The Dullsville,
yes. The Dullsville was so boring.
So this is, I remember this bike now. There was one in the motorcyclist fleet when I joined. It has like integrated saddlebags, and is this sort of like a very kind of like Honda design forward thing. And the reason that the engine is forgettable is that it was a very rare bird, and also I would say the engine was not sort of the cornerstone of the bike. You know, it's much more sort of like a nouveau, future of sport touring kind of thing. That's what I remember about it. Anyway.
I rode with a dude when I lived in Nashville that had one with like 120,000 miles on it. He absolutely loved it. But that's you stumped us, producer Chase, and also Jonathan. So shout out to Jonathan, who is the proud owner of the 2010 Honda. Trying to say that with a straight face, right? Sorry, Jonathan, we love you. 2010 Honda NT700V, no mods, just a bone stock 2010 Honda NT700V.
And I know I told you that your bike sounds terrible, Jonathan, and I stand by that. However, I appreciate that you didn't send us some straight pipe aftermarket intake pipe and a chip goofy thing that like is blowing out the microphone and we can't really hear it. So lots of respect for keeping your bike stock and for sending us a clip of a stock motorcycle, even though it stumped us from here to Kingdom Come.
And with that being said, Jonathan, thank you. If you are out there and you want to play the engine sound guessing game with us, you can also send us your year, make, model, and any mods you made to your motorcycle over to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. We need roughly a 30 to 35 second sound clip. Get the bike turned off, turn the bike on, let us hear it start up, let us hear it idle, give it a couple of good revs, let it hear it idle again. You know what you're doing at this point in time, but we would love to hear your sound clip if you want to send us one to play along. And Zach and I have some cleanup work to do here. We have to give away a t-shirt. We have to read out some comments from you, the listening audience. But for you, Lance, your time here is done. It's time for you to be bid adieu.
All right, guys. Carry on.
Thank you as always, Mr. Oliver.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Lance. We'll talk to you soon.
Right.
Well, Lance is gone, and we have got one hell of a roller coaster of an episode to kick off season 8. I think we're well past the 2-hour mark at this point, but we do want to give away a t-shirt, and we do want to read a listener comment. So I think, Zachary, if you're okay with it, where did today's t-shirt winner come from, and how can people get a t-shirt for themselves?
We selected this winner of the t-shirt from the ever-growing list, I should say, of Apple Podcast reviews, which we so appreciate because we enjoy the feedback, and we want people to know that the podcast is still being produced and, relevant in some capacity, or as relevant as it's ever been. So please do go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review if you can. If you leave one that is particularly interesting, funny, creative, or, tickles us in some way, you could yourself win a Highside, Lowside t-shirt, just like C. Logan 90, who is this episode's winner.
C. Logan 90 wrote a comment that said, I've been riding a Royal Enfield Himalayan for a long time. I'm sorry, let me start again. I completely butchered that. I've been riding a 2022 Royal Enfield Himalayan for a little over a year now. I found your podcast while on my way back from my first big road trip. It was the motorcycle dating game. I have since listened to every episode. None of my friends or family have ridden a motorcycle, but you all make me feel like I have friends to share my passion with and learn from. Thank you for all you do. It really means a lot, Charles.
Now,
so Charles,
quick pause.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
pause.
Quick pause here. Charles left this glowing review for us, thanking us for these conversations that we publish because it makes him feel like he's learning and he has some friends who he can commiserate with. And we just think that was so touching. However,
it made us feel good. And Charles, we agree. That's what we think about too.
However, Charles, your rating on Apple Podcasts was 1 out of 5 stars.
And we can handle not being good. Zach and I are very used to people telling us that we suck. It just felt a little bit odd that you were telling us that we were good people and that you liked us, and then you gave us a 1 out of 5 stars.
It's the mixed messaging that we're struggling with here, Charles. We feel like there may have been a mistake in your submittal of your rating. And, we can take, like Spurge said, we can take a hit every now and then. We just wanted to call it out that maybe a mistake was made in the number of stars that you meant to leave for our podcast. And
if you wanted to go back and change it to a 5-star review, then we wouldn't be upset with that.
Right. And you could, if you wanted to, theoretically, apologize to us in an email that you send to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. And if that email happens to include your mailing address and preferred t-shirt size, well, then, you would also get a t-shirt. But that's not why we're doing this.
No.
We just want to make sure that it's a clerical error involved with your submittal of this podcast review. So really, it's
no. The reason that we're doing this is that you said a lot of nice things, and we wanted the world to hear nice things about us. The side effect is that hopefully you go back and change it to a 5-star review.
Right. If that's even possible, we don't know. The point is, we read this glowing review, we saw your rating, and we laughed very hard. And we decided to spotlight your review, in part so that we could say that we are so pleased that you enjoy the podcast, and in part so that we could thank you for being a listener by sending you a free t-shirt. So please do send us your information to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com, and we will send you some swag.
And it never ceases to amaze Zach and I. I think we are truly humbled with the amount of new listeners that sometimes stumble upon the podcast. We get a lot of emails that come in from folks that aren't even riding a motorcycle yet, that listen to us ramble on for hours at a time about motorcycles. And it is something that, we take very seriously. It's the reason that when we came back from the Motul ad, we wanted to say that we're going to go through some efforts to put some articles in the description below, because we do take it very seriously that there are a wide range of motorcyclists listening to this, people that have been, riding for 30 years, and people have been riding for 30 days, and people that might ride 30 days from now. So we try to do our best. And with that, we've got a Highside, Lowside listener comment that came in via email. And Zach, since I read Clog 90's winner review, I'm going to let you take the Highside, Lowside comment from Mert.
Right. Mert Sagier, maybe? Not sure if I'm saying your name correctly. Sent us an email that said, among other things, I currently use my car only for transporting my 2-wheeled things around. I would like to ditch it if possible. What would your thoughts be on a road legal ATV or something similar to tow a bike trailer to the track and or to the trails? So Mert here wants to get rid of his car and use the most rudimentary 4-wheeled vehicle possible, if at all, to transport his 2-wheeled vehicles. And just, no car ownership is the goal here, which opens up a real hornet's nest of sort of like legality and can you ride an ATV on a public road or a UTV or whatever? Like, is that even possible? Luckily, our producer Chase and Spurgeon did some research.
Well, Mert, the long story here, the short story here is that it really depends on what state you live in. For example, I live in Pennsylvania. This would not be possible. Zach lives in California. Technically, it could potentially be possible depending on where in California you live. But it really does come down to your state's system here. And we did find a video for you to check out. If you go to YouTube and you type in states where ATVs and UTVs are street legal, there is a video by Steve Ludwig, and you don't even have to watch the whole video, because if you go down to the first comment pinned by Steve Ludwig is a whole list of states where you can use ATVs or UTVs on the street, where you can get license plates for them. And that would answer your question pretty thoroughly, Mert, in a way that, frankly, after a 2-hour plus podcast, I don't think we could even do it justice trying to list out all the different states.
No, you need a different resource than we have. I guess my quick take here is I am a motorcyclist through and through. I've ridden my whole life. I didn't own my first car until I was 31 years old. I have lived only off a motorcycle for long stretches of my life. And I think what I've come to realize is that there's a time and a place for having a car. And for one, I appreciate your gusto here, Mert, but I also think it's totally fair to have a car in the driveway and use it sometimes, especially if it furthers your two-wheeled experiences. And I think it's a noble effort, but I just don't know if it makes the most sense to tow your motorcycle with an ATV or UTV or somehow completely get out of car ownership. That's just a shoot from the hip take from me.
Yeah, unless he's trying to somehow save money, but based on the cost of ATVs and UTVs these days, I don't know if you're saving much money going to one of those. Yeah. But maybe Mert wants to just rip a UTV on the trail from time to time as well.
Maybe that could be. Yeah. All right. Well, thank goodness we've come to the end of episode 1 of season 8. If you've stuck with us this long, we are sorry and you're welcome. We would remind you to leave a comment, suggestion of any type if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to our podcast via any number of platforms, again, please do go to the Apple Podcast platform and leave a review for us, and you could win a t-shirt. And what else do we need to tell the ladies and gentlemen, Spurge?
Well, oftentimes, especially when we hit a podcast episode where we've run long, Zach and I have a tendency to rush through the ending. And our producer and our editor pulls us aside after we do this, and they're like, listen, just stick with it, be slow, the people will stay with you. And Zach and I never really believed them, and we try to rush through. But what we started doing at the start of season 7, and it carried through, was we try to give a little bit of a roundup thought, a South Park / Jerry Springer moment at the end. What did we learn? What was our takeaway? And even though this was a very long episode, we're not going to just rush through the ending. Right. So Zach, if you had to have a takeaway as we look forward into 2024, what is it that you, aside from, all the Yamaha scooters you're going to ride, what is it that you are most excited about in the coming year?
Well, I don't know. I enjoy each season as it approaches, and I feel the same way about motorcycles. I'm usually excited about whatever one is coming next. I think one of my takeaways from this episode is that Mr. Lance has got a real he's got a real cynical streak there. And as I said, I wasn't being sarcastic. I do appreciate that, because it's good to have someone who has the gall to, the stones to tear something down when it deserves to be. But my last takeaway here is that I did a little bit of research in the brakes since Lance left, and I would just like to say that the Honda NT700 Deauville, the engine for which provided our guessing game via Jonathan today, is in fact a 52-degree V-twin. It is in fact the same as far as I can tell, a Honda Shadow. So calling out the Honda Shadow, which I believe was Lance's call, maybe, was inspired. Lance Oliver is the gift that keeps on giving, and I haven't been able to determine if it's actually the same engine in those two bikes, but yet another tip of the cap to the Silver Fox.
Whatever you do, don't tell him he was right.
Right. Well, we know he won't listen to this podcast, so he's never going to hear this.
Exactly.
What about you, Spurge? What's your takeaway from season 8, episode 1?
A lot of cool motorcycles that Europeans are getting that we're not getting in America. What the hell's up with that?
Before Spurgeon starts running for office, we should probably go.
A Honda Hornet, a Yamaha Tenere Extreme. There's a motorcycle. There's an adventure motorcycle called the Extreme.
Right.
And Spurgeon Dunbar.
Right. They might as well call it the Spurgeon Dunbar edition. It's true. Unbelievable.
My God.
Okay. All right. Well, all of you brands who are releasing motorcycles in Europe and not in the United States, you've been put on notice. And Jonathan has been put on notice that his engine is similar to a Shadow, but that is really neither here nor there. I think we're ready to sign off. Yeah.
And none of you out there listening ever tell Lance that he was right. That's our little pact for each other. We're in this together, ladies and gentlemen. We're in this together. I got nothing else. I think it's time to say goodbye.
That's right. Thank you, Highside Lowsiders. We do appreciate you hanging out with us, and we will see you for the next episode and for the rest of 2024, we hope. Thanks for hanging out.
Welcome to Season 8, folks.